Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Natalia Melman. Natalia Melman was born in Argentina in 1986 to her parents, Gustav and Lava. In 1992, the family moved to Miramar, a coastal city southwest of Buenos Aires, in search of new opportunities. After relocating, the family encountered financial difficulties due to a failed business investment. Despite these challenges, Natalia maintained a positive attitude and found ways to contribute financially. She sold newspapers, lottery tickets, and other items to help her parents and save money for a bicycle. Natalia was very close to her family and was recognized as an outstanding student. Her mother noted that Natalia woke up every day at 4 in the morning to study. This dedication resulted in her achieving top scores in nearly all her subjects, and she was frequently elected as a class monitor. Natalia aspired to become an obstetrician-gynecologist and planned to study in Cuba, hoping to return to Argentina to assist women with limited resources. This was her primary dream. Besides her studies and family time, Natalia enjoyed having fun like any young girl. She loved spending time with friends and exploring various public places in Miramar, a tourist city with many attractions. In 2001, when Natalia was 15, a tragic event occurred. On the night of February 3, she went out for a walk with friends. They first visited a bar and then went to the nightclub Amadeus. Natalia intended to talk to her ex-boyfriend at the club, but it seems things did not go well, and she left the club at 1:00 a.m. This was the last time anyone saw her. Her parents believed she was at a friend's house and waited for her to come home. However, by the afternoon of February 4, they began to worry when she still hadn't returned. Around 6:00 p.m., their concern grew, and they went to the friend's house where Natalia was supposed to be. This friend said Natalia was not with her. Natalia's parents were worried when they couldn't find any information about her. They first contacted the hospital, hoping to learn if she had been in an accident or if something else was wrong. But this inquiry yielded no results. After not hearing from friends or the hospital, they decided to report her disappearance to the police. Unfortunately, the police were not very helpful. They asked questions about Natalia's clothing, her age, whether she had a boyfriend, and if she had a violent personality. Instead of registering her as missing, they categorized her as having run away from home. The parents strongly disagreed, believing that Natalia would not have left on her own, especially since she had been acting normally before she went missing. Witnesses saw Natalia at the club talking to her ex-boyfriend Maximiliano, who was with another girl named Diana. Frustrated, Natalia decided to leave the club. Another man present that night was Gustavo Fernandez, who was older than Natalia. Several witnesses reported that he followed Natalia as she said goodbye to her friends and left the party. Gustavo was known to the police due to his criminal record. He claimed that he had come to the party as a police informant. When he was taken to the police station to give a statement, he admitted that he had seen Natalia, but maintained that he had not approached her. He said that she was walking a few meters in front of him, and that although they were walking in the same direction, he had lost sight of her when a patrol officer questioned him. After Gustavo gave his testimony, he was released, which angered Natalia's family. They felt he had more information than he revealed, but the police lacked concrete evidence to hold him. The officers who interviewed him noticed some unusual details, including scratch marks on one of his cheeks. Nonetheless, the police decided to release Gustavo. Friends, family, and volunteers joined the search for Natalia. Several photos of her were printed and volunteers went to nearby cities to hand out flyers. Unfortunately, these efforts did not lead to any significant discoveries. Several police officers joined the search and a helicopter was deployed, but no clues were found. As the days passed, Natalia's parents began to lose hope. Many people reported seeing her in various locations, some claiming that she appeared to be under the influence of drugs. while others claimed to have seen her in other cities in Argentina with a young man, leading many to believe that she had run away. At that time, people were searching for her, all hoping to find her safe and well. The police assisted in these search efforts. On February 8, 2001, 4 days after she went missing, Natalia was discovered. A forester found her body under a pile of branches. The body was soon confirmed to be Natalia Melman. Natalia's parents learned about the discovery of Natalia's body through the media. Natalia's father was in another city in Buenos Aires at the time, where he was looking for dogs to help find Natalia's body. When he heard the news, he quickly returned to Miramar. Natalia's father was with her from the time the body was found until the autopsy. He wanted a thorough investigation, but Natalia's fingernails had been cut, which was unfortunate because the DNA of potential attackers can often be found under fingernails when victims try to defend themselves. The results of the forensic examination showed that there were numerous signs of trauma, along with traces of blood on her hands and thighs. She also suffered injuries that could have been caused by a blunt object. In addition, her body had burns and her clothes were partially torn. Toxicology tests were conducted, but no drugs were found, although a very high concentration of alcohol was detected in her blood. It is important to note that when Natalia left the party and said goodbye to her friends, she did not appear to be intoxicated. Those who accompanied her insisted that she had not been drinking, which raised many questions. The cause of death was determined to be strangulation with a rope tied around her neck. The attacker left a small knot, similar to a bow, on the left side of her neck. This suggests that the killer had plenty of time. The multiple injuries on her body suggest that she had been subjected to various forms of violence, making this one of the most horrific crimes in the country's history. Biological evidence was found, including at least 5 different DNA samples that needed to be analyzed. Additionally, it was determined that she had been dead for 4 to 5 days, suggesting that Natalia likely died on the day she went missing, or the day after. Police suspected Gustavo of being involved in the case. They began searching for him, but he appeared to be evading arrest. People who had seen him regularly had not seen him in recent days, suggesting that he had gotten wind of the situation and fled. While police continued to search, they obtained a search warrant for his home. There they discovered a jacket that had been washed several times, which further raised their suspicions. A luminol test found multiple bloodstains on the jacket, further confirming his guilt. They searched for him everywhere, but it was like he had vanished without a trace. The media extensively reported on the case, and Natalia's family received support from numerous people. Although there were many false leads, they also received a lot of helpful information. Just a week after the body was found, Gustavo were arrested. At first he did not want to talk, but eventually he provided evidence against 3 police officers. At the same time, the police were trying to find the location of the murder. Through tips that Natalia's family received after the case was reported in the media, they identified it as an abandoned house in the Copacabana area. The house was owned by a police officer, and there were allegations that some police officers had used it to bring young girls, drug them, and assault them. The police obtained a search warrant for the house and brought in police dogs. The dogs reacted strangely to the strong odor in the house. The police then focused on collecting evidence. They used luminol and discovered traces of blood on the washed walls, along with hair and soil samples. These samples were compared to those found on Natalia's clothing, which matched. This indicated that the soil in the house and the soil on Natalia's clothing were similar, leading the police to theorize that she likely died in that house. Gustavo then charged 3 policemen, including Oscar Alberto Echenique, Ricardo Alfredo Suarez, and Ricardo Anselmini. This brought the total number of suspects to 4, but only 1 was arrested. The only person in pretrial detention was Gustavo. The 3 remaining police officers are free pending trial, and all 4 have pleaded not guilty. Police searched their homes and cars, discovering key evidence in one of the cars. They found traces of DNA from blood that matched Natalia's, along with hair that also belonged to her. DNA samples from the car matched those from the 3 police officers. One of the DNA samples found on Natalia's body matched that of police officers Suarez, Anselmini, and Oscar Alberto. However, 2 more DNA samples were still needed to be identified, bringing the total to at least 5 different DNA samples discovered. Despite this overwhelming evidence, the only person arrested was Gustavo. A year later, in 2002, a verdict was reached. Oscar Alberto Echenique, Ricardo Alfredo Suarez, and Ricardo Anselmini were sentenced to life in prison for murder, while Gustavo Daniel Fernandez received a lighter sentence of 25 years. It is unclear whether Gustavo used violence. It is only known that he kidnapped Natalia. Gustavo's original sentence was 25 years in prison, but after a few years, his sentence was reduced to 15 years. In Natalia's case, a pubic hair found at the crime scene was sent for testing and was found to belong to Ricardo Panadero, a former police chief in Miramar. An attempt was made to bring Panadero to trial with additional evidence, which was ultimately successful. However, during Panadero's trial, the judge determined that the small DNA sample was not enough evidence to convict him, so Ricardo Panadero was acquitted. However, in 2019, Ricardo Panadero's previous acquittal was overturned, and he is currently awaiting trial. It is important to note that Panadero's DNA evidence is not the only aspect of Natalia's case. Several witnesses reported seeing Panadero in the car that abducted Natalia on the night of the incident. However, the judge chose to ignore this testimony, citing that some of the witnesses were homeless and were considered less credible. A new judge has since taken over and said he will consider all testimony and evidence. Despite their life sentences, the defendants were still given certain privileges. They could leave the prison for 2 hours every 15 days to maintain family ties and reintegrate into society. After public protests, this privilege was revoked. However, in 2017, they requested to leave again, and the court granted it. In October 2018, this privilege was revoked again, but was reinstated in December 2018. After that, the defendants were allowed to leave the prison for 12 hours every 15 days without wearing a location tracking bracelet. Notably, one of the defendants lived just a 5-minute walk from Natalia's mother's house. This allowed them to move freely around the city, spend time with their family, and visit various locations. Natalia's family has been trying to have the defendants' right to leave prison revoked. In 2021, the defendants applied for early release but were denied, despite their good behavior. It is important to note that Ricardo Panadero has been awaiting trial for 3 years, while Gustavo was released early after serving a short sentence. The case is filled with a sense of injustice, and a 5th DNA sample has yet to be found. Natalia's family is actively addressing these issues, but the process is slow. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Matthew Patrick Matt Podolak. Matthew Patrick Matt Podolak, born June 10, 1975, in Ohio, USA, to Patricia Romano and Leonard Podak. In high school, Matthew was a member of the hockey team. After graduating, he enlisted in the U.S. Navy and later worked at Phoenix Industrial Finishing, a company owned by his uncle. Although this provided opportunities for advancement, but Matthew encountered difficulty to connect with his co-workers, who may have felt jealous of his privileged position. His sister, Chrissy Duca, attributed the tension was partly due to rumors of a possible promotion, which his colleagues believed he did not deserve. Outside of work, Matthew was an outdoors enthusiast who enjoyed activities such as boating, camping, and hunting. He also played softball and hockey during his free time. In 2003, Matthew met Holly McFeature, and they began dating shortly after, eventually they moving in together in Cleveland. The relationship marked a new chapter in Matthew's life. Friends said that he was eager to settle down and start a family. Matthew and Holly had 2 children together, Samantha and Josh, and also raised Holly's child from a previous relationship as part of their family. Matthew's mother, Patricia, said he loved Holly very much, and his feelings for her were sincere. Matthew's life underwent a drastic change when he transformed from a bachelor to a father of 3 in a short period. Initially, his relationship with Holly was filled with love and mutual understanding. However, by 2005, their romance had turned sour, becoming increasingly argumentative and strained. On multiple occasions, Matthew would leave home after a fight with Holly and spend the night with a friend. Friends, who had grown concerned about the relationship, advised Matthew to end things with Holly, citing her selfish behavior as a major red flag. Despite their warnings, Matthew refused to listen and continually returned to Holly. Furthermore, Matthew had taken out a life insurance policy that named Holly as the beneficiary. Despite the advice of friends to remove her from the policy, Matthew did not make any changes. During this time, Matthew's behavior was erratic, which ranged from extreme happiness to intense anger, upset, and fear. According to Matthew's best friend, Russell, he had become depressed during this time. However, he seemed overly optimistic about his future, particularly when it came to raising his 3 children, a prospect that filled him with both hope for the future. Russell advised Matthew to take precautions and remove the guns from their home due to the volatile situation they were in. After the hockey season ended in 2006, he started online gambling, which resulted in him losing a lot of money. His family and friends noticed that he was struggling with depression and advised him to see a doctor. He followed their advice and was prescribed antidepressants. By the spring of 2006, Matthew's health started to deteriorate. His condition worsened by Memorial Day weekend, causing Russell to become extremely concerned about Matthew's physical well-being. Around that time, Russell had asked him for help transferring a motor from one boat to another. However, he was no longer the strong person he once was, experiencing severe back pain and complaining of excessive sweating and a lack of strength. Russell urged Matthew to see a doctor and recommended Dr. Thomas Mandat. He scheduled an appointment with Dr. Mandat for July 26, 2006. On the day of the appointment, he called Russell to ask for directions to the doctor's office. During their conversation, Russell could hear Holly arguing with Matthew in the background. Matthew visited the doctor, complaining of back pain. After examining him, Dr. Mandat diagnosed him with kidney stones and prescribed medication to help pass the stones and alleviate the associated pain. In a phone call to his father on the afternoon of July 30th, Matthew shared his excitement about buying a new fishing rod for his daughter. He was looking forward to taking her fishing, hoping they could go together soon, along with his father. Matthew's anticipation for their upcoming family outing were evident in the conversation with his father. On the evening of the same day, Matthew attended a party with Russell. He found Matthew's health condition alarming. Matthew had gained significant weight, was sweating excessively, and struggled to walk. Matthew also complained of severe back pain. Later that evening, Matthew's condition worsened, and Holly became concerned. She called 911 and then contacted Matthew's father, informing him that something was wrong with his son. Matthew's father had a brief phone conversation with him and found he to be confused and very distressed. Matthew was rushed to the emergency room at Parma General Hospital, where doctors suspected he was experiencing organ failure. Tests revealed that Matthew's kidneys had failed, and he was suffering from metabolic acidosis, a condition where the blood becomes highly acidic. Dr. Mandat, an emergency room doctor, suspected that Matthew had ingested a toxic substance, such as methanol or antifreeze. When questioned, Holly denied the possibility that Matthew had swallowed antifreeze or medical alcohol, asserting that he had not consumed anything that could have caused harm. On July 31, 2006, Matthew passed away at the hospital due to kidney failure. According to Dr. Mandad's testimony, Matthew's death was not caused by respiratory problems, as metabolic acidosis typically is. Instead, Dr. Mandad explained that ethylene glycol can also cause this condition. After Matthew's death, his family and friends were overcome with grief, but Holly seemed unaffected. In the days that followed, her friend Rebecca Vega tried to offer support and accompanied her to the funeral home. However, Vega noticed that Holly did not feel sad at all. At the wake, Matthew's father had to ask Holly to join the family in the main room to receive visitors, and even then, she appeared to be unfeeling and indifferent. Russell recalled that Holly acted like it was a normal gathering, showing no signs of grief. The day after Matthew's death was particularly telling. Holly used Matthew's bank card to withdraw money from an ATM and wrote checks in his name, draining his bank account. When Matthew's mother reported Holly's suspicious behavior to the police, Holly was arrested and charged with 2 counts of forgery. She later agreed to restitution and was placed on probation for 1 year. Holly was the beneficiary of Matthew's life insurance policy, although the policy was relatively small, and she received only $10,000 after his death. 2 weeks later, her friend Rebecca visited Holly and noticed various cleaning supplies, including what appeared to be solvents, left out in the open. Since there were small children living in the house, Rebecca found this absurd and asked Holly about it. She calmly explained that one of the items was antifreeze, which Matthew used to winterize his boat. However, Russell disagreed with this and stated that Matthew's boat had not been operational since its engine broke down in 2004 or 2005. Holly's demeanor after Matthew's death raised concerns with others. For example, she had an intimate relationship with Michael Jaima, a Cleveland police officer, who would often visit her home for coffee. Michael had known Holly since 2002. One day, Michael called Holly to ask if he should come to her house at this time. She replied that there was no need to worry about it anymore, because Matthew died last week, without showing any emotion. She attributed Matthew's death to kidney issues and pain from playing hockey, but her tone came across as careless and heartless. Following Matthew's death, his belongings were removed from the house. Holly asked a friend to erase some content from Matthew's computer and then cut up his clothes to make a quilt. 6 weeks after Matthew's passing, Holly began dating Charles Lipham, a Cleveland police officer. Initially, she told Charles that Matthew had died from kidney failure. However, after the autopsy report was released in January 2007, she changed her story. The autopsy revealed that Matthew had an unusually large amount of ethylene glycol in his system, the key ingredient in antifreeze. Later, Holly told Charles that Matthew might have intentionally taken something to end his life. The autopsy report confirmed that Matthew died from chronic ethylene glycol intoxication, but the coroner was unable to determine how or why he ingested the substance. It's worth noting that Holly told Charles that she didn't know what antifreeze was. Holly also provided conflicting explanations for Matthew's death, telling friend Sean Walsh that Matthew had died in an industrial accident. She also said that one of his co-workers might have poisoned him out of envy due to his connection to the boss. However, Matthew's family suspects that the truth behind his death may have been caused by someone close to him. This skepticism is partly due to Holly's indifferent attitude at the funeral, which contrasted with claims from Holly's sister that she had been crying in a car beforehand. During the investigation, detectives discovered 2 bottles of antifreeze in the garage of the house Holly had relocated from, which they took into evidence in 2007. The findings were recorded in a police report. Later in 2007, after parting ways with Charles, Holly met Jameson Kennedy while working at a bar. As they started dating, Holly chose not to share any details about Matthew's death with Jameson. However, Jameson has a troubled past, with multiple convictions and struggles with addiction. One evening in September 2008, Holly and Jameson were together, consuming alcohol, and take action intimate. According to Jameson, Holly became emotional, she began crying, and confided in him about Matthew's death. She expressed her desire to leave Cleveland and put the past behind her. Holly confessed to putting something in Matthew's drinks that made him ill and ultimately led to his death. However, Jameson was unsure if she was telling the truth. Seeking advice, Jameson met with his friend Santiago Feliciano, a lawyer, and shared Holly's confession with him. Santiago recommended that Jameson report this information to the authorities if he believed it to be true. Jameson then called Holly to discuss her earlier confession, unaware that their conversation was being recorded. He hoped she will turn herself in and admit that she is the one who caused Matthew's death. Instead, Holly vehemently denied ever harming Matthew, claiming Jameson was misinterpreting her. The conversation between Holly and Jameson caused a rift in their relationship. Jameson began to suspect that Holly was cheating on him. On November 8, 2008, Jameson went to her house to confront her. Feeling threatened, Holly called the police. When the officers arrived, Jameson attacked them and was subsequently arrested and charged with assault. Jameson was sentenced to 10 years in prison after being found guilty of assaulting officers. Following his arrest, he informed the police about a confession he'd have heard from Holly, reportedly linking her to the death of Matthew. This added to the evidence of Holly's involvement in Matthew's death. The police initially investigated the death in 2007 after the autopsy report was released, but the case stalled for many years because they initially did not consider it an intentional act. To re-examine the case, it is essential to look at the autopsy report. Dr. Galita, an experienced forensic pathologist and medical examiner, conducted the autopsy. Then, Dr. Galita and County Coroner Dr. Elizabeth Balch released their autopsy report in January 2007. The report determined Matthew's death was caused by chronic ethylene glycol poisoning, although the circumstances surrounding it were unclear. When Matthew ingested ethylene glycol, it entered his bloodstream and was quickly broken down by his liver using an enzyme called alcohol dehydrogenase. This process converted the ethylene glycol into oxalate, which then combined with calcium to form sharp calcium oxalate crystals. A large number of these crystals accumulated in Pax's kidneys, causing a blockage that disrupted their function. According to Dr. Galita, the severe pain Matthew experienced in his side starting on May 20, 2006, was likely caused by the crystals in his kidneys. When Dr. Galita examined Matthew's kidneys, he found two significant things. In addition to kidney damage, there are signs that the kidneys are beginning to heal. Further examination revealed the emergence of the crystals in Matthew's heart and brain, as well as severe acute myocarditis. Myocarditis is an acute inflammation of the heart muscle. The doctor stated that Matthew's myocarditis could not have been caused by an ingestion of ethylene glycol. Instead, the inflammation would have taken at least 3 weeks to develop. He also ruled out a heart attack as the cause of death. In conclusion, Dr. Galita determined that Matthew's death was the result of long-term ethylene glycol poisoning. He believed a series of but acute toxicity episodes, occurring over at least a 3-month period, ultimately led to his death. Matthew often drank iced tea at work, particularly raspberry flavor. He usually brought it in a thermos or the container. A Matthew's friend, Michael Mall, testified that Holly frequently brought Matthew lunch at work. His meal often came with a half or whole gallon container of iced tea. The police found 2 bottles of antifreeze in the garage of Holly's former home in August 2007. The bottles, one a Peak brand and the other a Saturn brand, were discovered after she had moved out. 3 years after Matthew's autopsy results were released, and report amendment was made to the report in 2010. The revised report, signed by County Coroner Dr. Frank Miller, confirmed that Matthew died from poisoning by ethylene glycol, a toxin found in antifreeze, in long term, and deemed the death a homicide. 6 years after Matthew's death, the authorities decided it was time to arrest Holly. She was formally charged in July of that year with the serious offense of depriving Matthew of his life. Holly's charges came as no surprise to Matthew's family. According to his older brother, Mark, they suspected Holly's involvement in his younger brother's death all along. Mark stated that Holly's behavior around the time of the death raised suspicions, saying she just wasn't acting like somebody who was losing a loved one. Authorities suspected that Holly had been secretly poisoning Matthew by adding antifreeze to his cold raspberry tea for several weeks or even months. In 2013, she went to court, pleading not guilty to the charges. However, there was no direct evidence, only indirect indications of her guilt. To prove their case, the prosecution called 15 witnesses to testify. These witnesses included Matthew's family and friends, Dr. Galita, who conducted the autopsy, Dr. Thomas Mandat, who was Matthew's doctor, and several police officers who investigated the case. Witnesses focused on several key points, including Holly's suspicious actions, a phone call Matthew made before visiting the doctor, and the fact that Matthew had not owned a functioning boat since 2004, which meant he had no use for antifreeze. Holly's defense team countered by stating that Matthew's family and friends had prejudged her as guilty and then pressured law enforcement to bring charges against her following Matthew's death. The prosecution's strongest testimony came from Dr. Galita, the medical examiner in charge of performing the autopsy. Dr. Galita provided a detailed explanation for his conclusion that Matthew was the victim of chronic poisoning over a period of 3 months. He arrived at this conclusion because on the emergence of crystals in Matthew's kidneys and myocarditis, a type of inflammation of the heart muscle that can be caused by exposure to ethylene glycol. After ruling out causes other of myocarditis, such as infection, Dr. Galita emphasized that Matthew's condition could not have been the result of a single, short-term exposure to ethylene glycol. Dr. Galita also clarified why the initial autopsy report, completed in 2007, did not indicate that Matthew's death was intentional. He explained that, at the time, the coroner's office did not have enough information to make this determination, which led to the manner of death being listed as undetermined. However, after further investigation, the report was revised. The testimony of other witnesses supported Dr. Galita's findings. Matthew's friends reported that his health began to decline in the spring of 2006, which was confirmed by his diagnosis of kidney stones in July 2006. The friends also described a volatile relationship between Matthew and Holly, stating that Matthew seemed fearful and had removed his firearms from the home at the advice of a friend. Holly's lawyers claimed that their client was not involved in Matthew's death, suggesting instead that Matthew's depression led him to end his life. According to the defense, Matthew was struggling with losses from online gambling, work-related issues, and difficulties communicating with his child, ultimately leading him to deliberately ingest a lethal dose of antifreeze. The defense argued that Matthew died from a single dose of antifreeze rather than from prolonged exposure over several weeks or months. In support of this theory, they brought Dr. Robert Lux to testify in court, the coroner from El Paso County, Colorado. Dr. Lux testified that Matthew's death was a result of acute poisoning due to a single ingestion of ethylene glycol, indicating a possible suicidal intent. He disputed Dr. Galita's diagnosis of myocarditis and instead believed Matthew had suffered a heart attack. Furthermore, Dr. Lux explained that myocarditis can occur independently of ethylene glycol poisoning and that flank pain is not typically a symptom of ethylene glycol poisoning. He said that there was no connection between kidney stones and ethylene glycol poisoning, a relevant detail in the case. Several key witnesses testified during the trial. One notable witness was Jameson Kennedy, a felon who had been serving a 10-year sentence for assaulting police officers. Jameson claimed that Holly had confessed to him that she had mixed something into Matthew's drinks. However, Holly denied ever making such a statement. Holly argued that Jameson's testimony was motivated by a desire for leniency in his own case or revenge against her. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury delivered a guilty verdict on all counts. On August 28, 2013, the court sentenced Holly McFeature to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Magali Part. Magali Bertrand was born on January 17, 1982, to Eric Bertrand, a truck driver, and Evelyn, a homemaker. She was the oldest of 5 siblings and grew up in the town of Lancrans. When she was 12, her parents divorced in 1994, and her father moved to Switzerland to start a new life with another family. Despite maintaining a close relationship with him, Magali decided to stay with her mother in France, as she was affected by the divorce. On July 12, 1998, 16-years-old Magali met 23-years-old Jeffrey Parts. Jeffrey had a miserable childhood. He grew up in an abusive home with an alcoholic father, Patrick, and he spent part of his childhood in foster care. As an adult, Jeffrey had reconciled with his father and forgiven him. Soon after they met, Jeffrey had spent a few days in prison because his ex-girlfriend accused him of domestic violence. When Magali's mother learned about Jeffrey's past, she disapproved of him. This led to a conflict between Magali and her mother, led Magali to move in with her father. There, she found a job as a care worker in a retirement home. In 2000, when 18-years-old Magali, she married Jeffrey. They moved to the town of Ornix, where Magali found a job at a DIY store, while Jeffrey worked as a painter and decorator. On March 26, 2001, Magali prepared breakfast for Jeffrey before he left for work. While they were eating, Magali mentioned that she intended to walk their Rottweiler puppy to a convenience store to buy cigarettes. The store was just a 2.5-mile round trip. However, when Jeffrey returned home from work at 4:30 p.m., he found that neither Magali nor their puppy was there. The kitchen was still messy from when Magali made breakfast, which was unusual because she usually kept things tidy. Worried, Jeffrey contacted Magali's parents, but they hadn't seen her either. By 5 p.m., he went to her workplace and discovered that she hadn't shown up for her afternoon shift and had not reported in sick. Jeffrey went to the police station to report his wife as missing. After that, he returned home and enlisted the help of a friend with an ATV to search for Magali. They called off the search around 5 a.m. so they could get some sleep. Later that morning, around 11 a.m., a young man who was picking mushrooms near his uncle's farm found a woman's body. She was partially undressed and had been burned. At first, he thought it was a mannequin that someone had discarded, but as he got closer, he realized that he was wrong. He quickly ran to his uncle's farm, and they called the authorities. Investigators were able to identify the body as 19-years-old Magali Part using a report filed by Jeffrey and some jewelry that had the couple's names and wedding date engraved on it. Near the body, they also found a cigarette butt, a knife with its blade stuck in a tree, and a wrapper from a chocolate bar. They found a jerry can filled with petrol 300 meters away. An analysis of a cigarette butt found at the scene indicated that it was a Moroccan brand sold exclusively in Switzerland. Importantly, detectives discovered no evidence of a fire where Magali's body was recovered, which led them to believe that she was murdered elsewhere and her body was later dumped in the woods. Magali's autopsy was performed on March 28, 2 days after her disappearance. She had been beaten, suffering 12 fractures throughout her body, and then burned, which made it impossible for the medical examiner to determine her exact time of death. Additionally, the official cause of Magali's death has never been made public. The medical examiner found sperm inside the body Magali's, indicating she had sexual intercourse about 48 hours before her death. However, there was no evidence of sexual assault. The examiner also detected a prescription medication for anxiety in her bloodstream, which neither Jeffrey nor Magali's family knew she was taking. Investigators could not locate a prescription for this medication in her name. Additionally, DNA analysis of a cigarette but found at the scene revealed it belonged to Magali, even though she did not smoke that brand. Detectives concluded that the cigarette was discarded after her death. This makes this information more confusing. Law enforcement began to suspect that the scene might have been staged. None of Magali's belongings were ever found. However, the Rottweiler puppy was found safe but hungry in a town called Kozy, which is about 5.5 miles from Ornix. Despite the rain that occurred between the 26th and the 28th, the puppy was clean and dry. The puzzling thing was that the dog smelled of Magali's perfume, but its leash was lost and never found. Although the puppy may have been in contact with the suspect, but the police did not take her in for forensic examination and instead returned her to Jeffrey. Investigators traced Magali's last movements and discovered that the day before her death, she had spent time with her husband and 2 friends. One of these friends informed the authorities that Magali had mentioned receiving lingerie from Jeffrey's father as a birthday gift that year. At 10 p.m. that day, Magali checked her voicemail and then turned off her phone. Early the next morning, at 2 a.m. and 5 a.m., the uncle of the man who found her body remembered that his dogs had been barking for a long time, which might indicate they sensed someone in the woods. For his part, Patrick never seems to mention that he gave lingerie to his daughter-in-law, Magali. Patrick claims he went to the couple's house at 10 a.m. on the 26th, the day Magali went missing, to collect the mail, and he stated that she was not there. It is still unclear why Patrick's letter was at Magali's house. On the afternoon of the 26th, in Saint-Jean-Pont, someone attempted to withdraw about €400 from an ATM using Magali's credit cards but failed due to an incorrect PIN. This person also had Jeffrey's credit card and successfully withdrew €35, suggesting they knew his PIN. 3 eyewitnesses confirmed that they saw Magali in the same town on the day she died, between 9:30 and 11 a.m. Her family is puzzled about how and why she was there, as it would have been a long walk for her to get cigarettes. Magali, who was 19, and her husband did not have a car. However, all the eyewitnesses admitted they could not be completely certain that the woman they saw was indeed Magali. Magali's case has been covered by the media very little over the years. The lack of progress in the investigation has left her family feeling frustrated, and they have often expressed their pain to the media. Since the murder happened near the Swiss border, journalists in Switzerland began to take an interest in the case. They uncovered multiple shortcomings in the police investigation, including the loss of DNA, which was later recovered, as well as the disappearance of photographs of tire tracks found at the crime scene. Additionally, the police were so convinced that Magali was the victim of a random attack, they did not pursue further leads. The attack was very violent, indicating that the perpetrator had a lot of anger towards Magali. However, the police did not thoroughly question her colleagues, friends, and family, nor did they examine their cars. Law enforcement also thought that eyewitnesses had seen Magali in another town that day, leading them to strongly believe she had gone missing at the time she was last seen. Consequently, again, they did not investigate other hypotheses. Magali's husband, Jeffrey, was cleared as a suspect due to his alibi. In 2004, 3 years after her death, it was revealed that in the months before the crime, she had missed work multiple times, but Jeffrey and other family members were not aware of this. 2 years later, Jeffrey and Patrick were held in police custody for questioning but were released because there was no evidence connecting them to the crime. Jeffrey has reportedly mentioned that he has an idea of who the attacker might be, but he has never revealed their identity publicly. His father, Patrick, who was questioned due to the lingerie incident, stated that he was at home when Magali disappeared. But the reliability of this remains unclear. There have been very few updates in Magali's case over the years. In 2015, her father, Eric, raised funds to hire a private investigator. The investigator confirmed what journalists had already reported, that the police made several mistakes during the initial investigation and they may have overlooked important information. In 2016, Magali's body was exhumed for further examination, but the results were unhelpful. After Magali's passing, her husband, Jeffrey, remarried and had 4 children with his new wife. Tragically, he ended his life on September 15, 2018. Magali's parents are not sure why he did that, whether it was due to guilt or sorrow over Magali's death. Jeffrey's suicide note did not mention Magali, but his new wife stated that the murder weighed heavily on their marriage throughout. In 2020, investigators re-examined the cigarette but found that the crime scene and discovered fingerprints on it that did not match either Jeffrey or his father Patrick. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Victoria Nazirova. Olga Tsvyk, a 35-year-old Ukrainian immigrant eyelash artist, reported a robbery at her home. The incident occurred on September 2, 2016. Olga Tsvyk called the police after discovering that several valuables had been stolen from her bedroom. When the police arrived at the scene, Olga Tsvyk explained that she had gone to the hospital earlier due to severe dizziness and nausea. To investigate the circumstances surrounding the incident, the police conducted a detailed interview with Olga Tsvyk. During the interview, she recalled a recent unpleasant encounter with a client named Victoria Nazirova, who had come to her home to request urgent eyelash extensions. When Victoria came to Olga Tsvyk's home to request urgent eyelash extensions, Olga Tsvyk told Victoria that she only did eyelash extensions in the salon and did not take clients at home. However, explaining to Victoria was useless, and Olga Tsvyk had to agree to take her in. During the investigation, it was discovered that Victoria had come to Olga Tsvyk's apartment, bringing 3 slices of cheesecake from a famous local bakery. Victoria enjoyed 2 slices and insisted that Olga Tsvyk eat the 3rd slice. After drinking tea and eating the cheesecake, Olga Tsvyk began to feel unwell. After Victoria left, Olga Tsvyk suffered from severe nausea, eventually passing out for about 30 minutes. After regaining consciousness, Olga Tsvyk called an ambulance and was taken to the hospital by ambulance. However, medical tests found nothing unusual in her blood. When Olga Tsvyk returned home, she discovered that several valuables were missing and reported the theft to the police. The police found Olga Tsvyk listless and looking unwell. The police suspected that Olga Tsvyk was under the influence of drugs and had made up the story. Despite the police's suspicions, Olga Tsvyk maintained that she had not taken any medication, and Olga Tsvyk believed that the cheesecake she had eaten was the cause of her condition. Possibly poisoning. When searching the scene, police discovered a box of cookies from a local store in the trash, which Olga Tsvyk identified as the packaging for the cheesecake Victoria had brought. Police collected the remaining baking residue from the cheesecake, which was taken for in-room analysis to determine whether the cheesecake was the cause of Olga Tsvyk's health problems, but the forensic examination revealed nothing suspicious. Despite this, Olga Tsvyk insisted that the cheesecake was the cause of her condition. Olga Tsvyk mentioned that she had been to the hospital and that doctors had examined her body when she was admitted, and the police had contacted the medical facility to ask about Olga Tsvyk's condition and the test results. However, the doctors refused to provide information, citing patient confidentiality. The police considered this a reason not to believe Olga Tsbyk. The customer that Olga Tsbyk had told them about could not be found, so the case was adjourned. These details were told by a neighbor who the very next day noticed a suspicious woman at Olga's apartment. This woman came and went several times, hanging around the beauty master's apartment until she came face to face with her neighbor. The strange woman said that her friend Olga was sick and hurriedly left the house. The neighbor saw that the door to Olga's apartment was open and looked in to check on her. It was unbearably stuffy in the victim's apartment. The heating was on full blast despite the 30-degree summer heat. Olga was alive, but she was unconscious. She was lying on her bed, but she was wearing an unusual combination of clothes, revealing underwear and warm sports pants. When the detectives heard about this, they had the feeling that someone was deliberately trying to change the victim's clothes. Scattered around Olga were pills containing a powerful drug. It looked as if Olga had taken the pills with the intention of taking her own life. A neighbor immediately notified 911, describing the strange woman as dark-haired, attractive-looking, and very similar to Olga. After learning new details, investigators became convinced that the doppelganger woman was not a figment of Olga's imagination. Then the detectives took up the case more actively. Everything they saw in the apartment seemed to be a description of a crime scene they wanted to frame as a voluntary demise. Detectives believed that the persistent cheesecake customer named Victoria Narova was involved. The police began searching for Victoria, but they had no leads, no information about who she was, or her photograph. Later, however, the department was approached by a private detective, a former police officer who had long been following the con artist's violent activities. He had already tracked Victoria online, where she advertised escort services on a dating site and through social media. The private investigator believed that the woman used online promotion to find victims for her crimes, and the scheme worked perfectly. Victoria would arrive at the home of the next client, then she would drug the person with psychoactive substances so that they would lose consciousness. After that, she would take everything of value and then go into hiding. This activity could have been concealed indefinitely if not for this tragic circumstance. Meanwhile, Alsvik finally recovered from the unpleasant events. Then, having discharged from the hospital, she shared on her page in social networks the story of poisoning. After that, one of her clients unexpectedly told that she knew a man named Ruben Barakov who was in a similar story. Ruben was the owner of a dry cleaner, and the man met Victoria Nazarova on a Russian dating site about a couple of months before Olga's cheesecake poisoning. The new acquaintance invited Ruben to her home and boasted that she was a very good cook. He agreed and came to her place, but as soon as he tasted the dishes, the man lost consciousness. The friend emptied his pockets, took expensive watches, money, and cards. The man was under the influence of a very strong psychoactive substance and sincerely believes that it almost killed him. Later, when he began to regain consciousness, Victoria took him to the dry cleaners, gave him to his colleagues, and told them that he was drunk and then left. From there, only then did Ruben realize that he had been robbed. The private investigator assumed the situation was much more serious, and the two victims of the poisoner were very lucky. In 2017, he worked with a client from Russia to help track down an elusive criminal. Nadia Ford turned to the private detective after the disappearance of her own mother, Alla Alexenko. The girl herself lived in New York, USA, but was born in Russia. Nadia was originally from Kotor. Her mother, Alla Enko, single-handedly brought up her daughter and son, and she had a hard time. She worked 5 jobs to provide for her children. Nadia dreamed of living in the USA since childhood, and her dream came true when the girl came to study in America in 2007. There, she met a guy whom she married and took his surname, Ford. But the marriage did not work out, and the spouse is divorced. Nadia stayed to live in the United States and successfully settled there. She maintained close relations with her mother, who at that time was left alone. Years later, Alla Alexenko went missing in Russia, and Nadia hired a private investigator to find her mother, Alla Alexenko, in 2017. In an effort to find her, Nadia hired a private investigator who discovered that Victoria had rented a car on the day her mother went missing. The investigator looked into the car's information and found surveillance footage from October 5, 2014. The footage showed the car driving on the highway with two people inside, the driver, Victoria, and a motionless woman in the front passenger seat who looked like the missing 54-year-old Alla Alexenko. Nadia believed that the woman in the footage was her mother. Nadia went to the police, who verified that Victoria had indeed rented the car. As a result, the police summoned Victoria for questioning. During an interview with Victoria, she revealed that she had indeed driven the rental car involved on October 5, but said she was alone. Victoria agreed to take a lie detector test. Victoria was released pending the results, but later it turned out that Victoria failed a lie detector test and became the prime suspect in the case. Before the police could arrest her, Victoria took advantage of the opportunity, quickly fleeing the country on the first available flight. Meanwhile, the police expanded the search for the missing Alla Alexenko. Nadia actively participated in the investigation for 6 months, holding out hope that her mother was still alive. During the investigation, the police followed the route of the rented car, which led them to a forest near Victoria's hometown of Armavir. Upon reaching the forest, the police discovered a body about 3 hours away from Alla Alexenko's residence. The body was so badly burned that it was unrecognizable. Nadia identified her mother's body by her teeth. Despite a thorough investigation, the cause of Alla Alexenko's death has not been found. The police issued an arrest warrant for Victoria Nazirova and sent it to Interpol. However, Victoria escaped for a long time. Nadia returned to the United States after attending her mother's funeral in Kodar. For a long time, Nadia struggled to overcome the pain of losing her loved one. Finally, Nadia regained her health and vowed to her mother that she would pursue justice and hold the killer responsible for her mother's death accountable. One day, while surfing the internet, Nadia came across a post on social media. Victoria Nazirova, the prime suspect in her mother's death, was living a lavish life in Mexico, seemingly unconcerned about her wanted status. Nadia informed the U.S. police about Victoria's whereabouts and the police began an investigation. Nadia then hired a top U.S. private investigator to speed up the investigation. A wealthy friend of Nadia's paid for the detective services, as Nadia could not afford them. At the time, Nadia had been unemployed for months due to her search for her mother. The private investigator analyzed Victoria's social media photos, including recent posts by Victoria. The investigator discovered that Victoria was in the United States. In one selfie, the sunglasses reflected the dashboard of a car. After examining several models, the investigator identified the car as a Chrysler 300. Detectives successfully tracked recent photos of Victoria to the Russian neighborhood of Sheepshead Bay in Brooklyn. By checking a database of similar cars in the area, police were able to narrow down the search and identify the culprit. Despite the challenges, police located Victoria and discovered that she lived with her boyfriend in a complex where the Chrysler was registered in his name. Unaware that Interpol was searching for her worldwide, Victoria posted the photos online without hesitation. Detectives identified Victoria's boyfriend and contacted him. It turned out that the boyfriend had been poisoned by Victoria and was seeking help. Furthermore, Victoria had poisoned her boyfriend's beagle, causing the dog to die. On March 20, 2017, 41-year-old Victoria Nazirova was finally found and arrested. Nadia, the private investigator, and the police were able to breathe a sigh of relief. Leaving Victoria at large posed a significant threat as she had the potential to harm many more people. When searching Victoria's apartment, the police discovered Olga Tsbyk's identity card. Victoria's main motive for targeting Olga Tsbyk was not only her desire for money and valuables, but Victoria also wanted a passport. Victoria's temporary visa was about to expire and she needed a new ID card to stay in the country and avoid being tried in Russia. The face on Olga Tsbyk's passport bore a strong resemblance to Victoria's. The police suspected that Victoria intended to kill Olga Tsbyk and take her identity. Fortunately, Olga Tsbyk's neighbor intervened, saving her life. When they further examined the poisoned cheesecake in the laboratory, they discovered a banned sedative, which Victoria had added to the cake. The investigation revealed that Victoria had used this sedative to carry out her plot. Victoria would increase the dosage to make the victim unconscious. Olga Tsbyk was lucky to survive the incident. The unusually high temperature in her apartment was not accidental. Victoria deliberately increased the temperature to increase the effect of the sedative, which could have been fatal. Victoria clearly knew the situation in advance. To avoid suspicion, Victoria tried to cover her tracks by increasing the temperature in the house and dressing Olga Tsbyk in warm clothes. After her arrest, Victoria denied all charges, including her involvement in the disappearance and murder of Nadia's mother, as well as the intentional murder of Olga Tsbyk and the other victims. Police said Victoria was a suspect in the theft of 2 fur coats in May 2016, but the case was never solved. After several other incidents, it emerged that Victoria had been involved in the thefts, meeting men online, going to their homes, giving them drugs and stealing from them. Most of the men did not go to the police for fear of publicity, and Victoria escaped conviction. The trial was postponed for about 6 years due to the pandemic and the lengthy preparation of the case file. The case finally went to trial in January 2023, attracting media and public attention. Throughout the trial, Victoria remained silent. The court was forbidden from going into details about Alla Alexenko's death because the crime was committed in another country. Victoria's defense attorney said that there was no direct evidence or testimony linking Victoria to the crime, specifically the poisoning of the cheesecake and forcing Olga Tsbyk to eat it. According to Olga Tsbyk's testimony, Victoria brought 3 pieces of cheesecake to Olga Tsbyk's apartment, ate 2 in front of Olga Tsbyk, and then Olga Tsbyk ate the 3rd piece without hesitation. The prosecution argued that it was not an accident and that Victoria had deliberately added the drug to only 1 slice of the cake, knowing which one it was, and tricked Olga Tsbyk by eating the other 2 slices. After a thorough review of the case, the jury found Victoria Nazirova guilty of second-degree intentional homicide. Although the maximum sentence for this crime was 25 years in prison, the judge reduced the sentence to 21 years. However, by law, Victoria would be eligible for parole after 15 years in prison. Victoria Nazirova had been a sophisticated and stylish woman, but her life changed completely when she was sentenced to prison. The harsh realities of prison life took their toll on Victoria, with inadequate and poor nutrition. A fight in prison left Victoria severely injured, almost losing her sight. Victoria took the prison to court, filing a lawsuit against the prison for negligence on the part of the guards who failed to assist during the violent incident. The case was eventually settled out of court, with Victoria receiving $325,000 in damages. In an interview from prison, Victoria maintained her innocence, denying the charges related to the crimes she committed. Victoria will serve the remainder of her sentence in a U.S. prison before being deported to Russia, where she will stand trial for her alleged involvement in the murder of Alla Alexenko. Alla Alexenko's daughter Nadia has expressed relief that Victoria is facing justice for her actions and will no longer be able to escape punishment. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Martin Durham. Martin Durham was born in 1969 in Grand Rapids, Michigan. He was an ordinary child and lived in good conditions, all around his natural beauty. In addition, he loved fishing and hiking, capturing photos along the way. He usually took a tent and a hiking backpack to enjoy a few days in the fresh air, he often accompanied by an older cousin. At 17, Martin met his first love, Glenna Johnson, who was a year older. They live in the same area and attended the same school. Their romance was brief, leading to a quick breakup, but they got back together and broke up many times. They shared many interests and could not stay apart for long. Despite their similarities, but they ultimately decided to end the relationship and go their separate ways. For a long time, they neither saw nor communicated with each other. During this period, Martin met another woman, Christine Keller, and he quickly fell in love with her. The two of them get along very well, and then they soon moved in together. After a short time of dating, he realized that she would be an ideal life partner, and they should build a stronger relationship. In the following years, Christine and Martin married and moved into a house given to them by their parents, located in a quiet residential area of the city. Over the next few years, they had 2 sons and a daughter. Christine focused on managing the home and caring for the children, while Martin worked to support the family. In addition to his main job repairing cars, he also worked at a restaurant in the city of Vlam. Despite this, the early years of their marriage were challenging, especially because their children were born close in age. So, they had many difficulties in taking care of their young children. They slept little and were often exhausted, leading to frequent arguments. However, they were determined to overcome these difficulties. Martin was a devoted father and made every effort to support his family. Many people saw him as a role model. In March 1995, Martin's family faced a tragedy when a truck ran a red light and collided with his car. The truck dragged his car along the road, crushing both Martin and the driver. Martin suffered severe injuries, including broken ribs, a broken jaw, broken legs, and a traumatic brain injury that severely damaged a large part of his brain. Doctors tried their best to save him, but he was in a coma for months. Then, he underwent multiple surgeries and slowly began to recover. However, Martin's difficulties were not over. It took a long time for him to return to his normal life. He had to relearn basic movements, like sitting up and holding his head, before progressing to more complex ones. The accident left his face disfigured, and he lost some brain functions. Despite the difficulties, he tried to overcome them and return to a normal life with his family. He spent a long time moving around in a wheelchair before transitioning to crutches. Although he gradually overcame the physical effects of the accident, he remained psychologically affected. Martin could no longer work as an auto mechanic to support his family, and he encountered many physical limitations that turned his life upside down. The hardest thing for him was not being able to maintain the active lifestyle he had before. He loved camping, fishing, and traveling, but now he was bedridden and just hang around the house. Every movement caused him severe pain, which only the strongest painkillers could help manage. According to doctors, these effects would persist throughout his life. This challenging time affected not only Martin, who survived the accident, but also his family. His wife, Christine, previously managed only the children and household chores, but now she had to handle the family's finances. She was compelled to enroll the children in daycare and find a job to support them, in addition to caring for her sick husband. Fortunately, her close relatives pitched in to help. With their support, Christine was able to manage all the difficulties. However, Martin also became aggressive and hostile towards his wife. In addition, he also lost his memory. He cannot remember much about his past, including family events, and sometimes forgot his children's names. Longtime friends and acquaintances became strangers to him. He was isolated because he did not communicate well with people due to severe memory loss, difficulty concentrating, and confusion. This makes him cold and looked down upon. Martin often retreated into his own thoughts, which he kept to himself. Meanwhile, he was recovering from injuries and regularly attended physiotherapy, sometimes staying in the hospital for treatment. He switched doctors several times, but fortunately, his physical condition gradually improved. However, he was still tormented by the psychological aftermath of his trauma. At the same time, Martin constantly controls the family's spending and criticized his wife's financial management. This made their relationship more and more strained. This was a very difficult time for the young family. Martin went through a difficult process of dealing with trauma and psychological problems, but was unable to overcome them. Some issues made him angry, and he often lost his temper with his wife without justification. Christine did her best to accept the changes in her husband's behavior, but eventually, she felt she couldn't take it anymore. Years after the accident, Christine filed for divorce. Later, she admitted that she didn't want to do it, but she couldn't stand Martin any longer. The divorce was a major blow to Martin. He felt resentment and disappointment for a long time. Some time passed, he was able to regain his spirits. He received a large insurance payout for the accident, which he used to buy real estate and purchase another house. In addition, Martin was also paid a monthly sum by his insurance company as compensation for the accident during his recovery. Thanks to this, he was able to continue his life and take care of himself without financial hardship. After that, Martin moved to his new house with the parrot that Christine loved so much. She had left the bird with he to keep him company and prevent loneliness. The bird, a 15-year-old African gray parrot named Bat, was quite old. This new house is located in Sand Lake, not far from his previous house. He had big plans to recover as soon as possible, so he could return to normal life for the sake of his children. Martin quickly settled into his new place. He kept in regular contact with his children, and even his relationship with his ex-wife Christine improved. She noticed that he finally had an interest in life and enjoyed spending time in the backyard. He discovered his talent for design on his own, and this was soon recognized by others. Neighbors frequently sought his help for designing private gardens and lawn care. This job has helped him earn more income and gain confidence in dealing with life's difficulties and helping him improve his health. Doctors have observed a steady improvement in his condition and has a positive direction. Although Martin's health and mood have improved significantly, but Christine still hesitated to return to him. She is afraid that old problems may return. She kept her distance, maintained contact, and brought the children to visit. By chance, Martin reconnected with his first love, Glenna Johnson, who had also recently divorced. They rekindled old feelings and began a romantic relationship. Glenna eventually moved in with Martin. Glenna's children remained with her ex-husband, but she still visits them regularly. Martin's children also visited from time to time. Glenna and Martin enjoy activities such as fishing, hunting, and hiking. She assisted with his physical limitations during these times. However, it was challenging, so they often opted for walks in the area or visits to the casino, which they loved in their youth. These casino visits have become a monthly routine for them, where they tested their luck. They became well known in the local community, often invite friends and acquaintances over to play poker, backyard barbecues, and generally forming a harmonious partnership. It seems they have found each other again and are happy together. In the summer of 2005, Glenna and Martin decided to get married. Everything appeared fine, but their closest friends knew there were underlying issues in the seemingly perfect relationship. After the accident, Martin changed, he becoming more short-tempered and demanding. He tried to control Glenna and disliked when she did things without him or left him alone for errands. He tries to manage all their finances, which caused problems. She tried to manage family problems by himself, but he was suspicious that she was not entirely honest, spending excessively on unnecessary items. During this time, he continued to receive disability benefits, and his wife took on guardianship, but she had one weakness. Glenna was a gambler and spent a lot of money on it. She visited the casino much more often than her husband, without him knowing, and she losing a lot of money. Additionally, there were issues between Glenna and his ex-wife, Christine. Apparently, Martin frequently complained about Christine, accusing her of leaving him during a tough time after the accident, but he didn't talk about how he made Christine's life unbearable. Christine tolerated him for 2 years before leaving, but she continued to support him as much as she could. Christine kept in touch with Martin's and brought the children to visit he. However, he spoke negatively about Christine to his new wife, Glenna. Plus, Glenna also expressed that she absolutely does not like the children of Martin and Christine. This made Christine and her children feel uncomfortable, to the point where they didn't want to visit Martin when Glenna was there. They disliked hearing unpleasant things about their mother, Christine, and she supported their decision by not bringing them to their father. Martin became angry with his ex-wife and constantly quarreled with her. This led to tension with the children and Glenna. Overall, the relationships deteriorated, and everyone's behavior only worsened the situation. A clear testament to Glenna's deep love for Martin is the tattoo of his name on the back of her hand, which she got 18 years ago when they were dating. She never removed it, likely because she had strong emotions for him all these years. She has still loved him for the past 15 years and waited for the moment they would be together again. However, within the family, the relationship was far from romantic, with frequent disputes over money. Martin suspected Glenna was overspending and debt piled up. She often took money from him without his knowledge. Over time, she took complete control of the family's finances, further straining their relationship. Glenna began using the check from the insurance company that Martin received every month as an allowance. In addition, she also illegally traded in some strong drugs. At the time of the accident, Martin did not take these medications regularly, resulting in a large amount of medication being left unused. Glenna sold these medications secretly. However, his involvement in this activity remains unclear. Some believe he was complicit in the sale, help him earn extra income while he is recovering from a traffic accident and is struggling financially. But there are also those who oppose this theory, who believe that Glenna sold the remaining amount of medicine without telling him. Even though Glenna and Martin's relationship was having problems, they persisted in a toxic relationship for over 11 years. By 2015, they still acted friendly and were always seen together, but they no longer concealed their failing marriage. Occasionally, the discontent between them led to increasingly frequent scandals. One of Glenna's friends later claimed to have witnessed their breakup, during which Glenna threatened to kill Martin. Despite this, they mostly maintained the appearance of an ideal couple, walking hand in hand as they did at the start of their relationship in their youth. By May 2015, the issue of divorce had become serious. One morning that May, Christine, Martin's ex-wife, discovered that Martin was selling his house. She found an advertisement on an auction site and was very surprised. She immediately called Martin to ask why he suddenly wanted to sell a house he loved so much, where he devoted his love to creating his garden. However, he was unaware of this sale, so he asked his current wife, Glenna, about it. Glenna claimed it was a mistake and said she would resolve it, but the fact is she didn't solve it. Previously, their car had been repossessed due to debts, and Glenna had similarly assured Martin it was a mistake and she would fix it, but nothing changed. The auction for the house was scheduled for 3 weeks later, by the end of the month. Perhaps due to the debt accumulated during their marriage, and Glenna wanted to sell the house to pay off the debt, but she did not want to tell Martin about this. On May 13, 2015, one of Martin's neighbors visited him early in the morning to discuss some routine matters. The neighbor was surprised when no one responded to his knock, as Martin usually kept his door open at that time. Concerned, the neighbor entered the house and called out to Martin and Glenna, but no one replied. Venturing further inside, he discovered the reason for the silence. In their bedroom, he found Martin lying on the floor in a pool of blood, and next to it is Glenna, who was bleeding heavily from the head. Terrified that the perpetrator might still be around, the neighbor fled from the scene and immediately called 911. When the ambulance arrived, they realized that Martin was lifeless. Martin was lying on his side, wearing only his underwear, his body already cold, and the doctors confirmed that the 46 years old had died several hours earlier. However, Glenna was still alive and even conscious. She tried to say something. She managed to utter a fragmented sentence that was not understood. Glenna was found lying next to Martin, fully clothed. However, she could not provide any useful information about the incident. She was rushed to the hospital for medical treatment. A bullet had grazed her skull without damaging the brain, so her injuries were not severe. She recovered quickly after surgery at the clinic. Detectives were able to question her soon after, but she was still undergoing treatment, and they had other cases to handle. The investigators tried to piece together the sequence of incident by examining the crime scene thoroughly. It did not appear to be a robbery, because valuables or personal items in the house are not lost. Even the money, left in a visible spot, was untouched. Additionally, there were no signs of forced entry, suggesting Glenna and Martin might have known the attacker and let him in. During this time, police discovered that Martin was taking strong painkillers and Glenna involved in selling them. There was then an assumption that it was that trade that may have triggered the attack. The entire scheme of selling medicines was uncovered, and detectives believe there may have been a conflict with the buyer during the transfer process. However, by that time, forensic experts had already examined and analyzed the crime scene, including the bullets and weapons found in the house. The pistol was later tested and confirmed to be the murder weapon. In fact, this pistol has belonged to Martin for many years, but both of them were shot with it. First, the attacker must enter the house, know exactly where the weapon is and retrieve it. Then he finds the magazine, loads the gun, and then starts shooting. This plan seemed too complicated and therefore unlikely. Moreover, during a more thorough search of the bathroom, Martin's painkillers was found and had not been stolen, which ruled out the possibility of selling them and ruled out the motive for the crime being an attack by the buyer. The weapon used to kill Martin was found under the sofa in the living room. There is a lot of blood there, which did not match the location where the body was found. Apparently an attack also took place in the living room, a shooting, and then the shooting continued in the bedroom. Martin might have been shot in the living room, and then the body moved, but why was this done? It seemed this was done intentionally, perhaps to stage the crime and mislead the investigation. This assumption was confirmed when a spent cartridge case was found in the living room, indicating that the shooting occurred there. As the investigation progressed, more questions surfaced. Blood samples from different rooms were analyzed, revealing unexpected results. The analysis showed that all shots fired at Martin happened in the bedroom. His blood was not present in the living room, and there were no signs of his body being moved. The blood found in the living room belonged solely to Glenna, who was discovered in the bedroom. The bullet casing found in the living room corresponded to the shot that hit her head, supporting this theory. But how did she manage to reach the bedroom after this injury? Medical experts informed the police that this scenario was possible because Glenna's injury was less severe than initially thought. She could have reached the bedroom by herself, especially since she was conscious when found. Nonetheless, the situation appeared unusual. From then on, the police began to suspect that Glenna fired at her husband and then injured herself to divert suspicion. However, these theories still needed solid evidence. At this time, the police were unable to interview Glenna, as she was still in the hospital undergoing treatment and recovery. They took her mobile phone for investigation. Through this, detectives discovered that their family was experiencing a severe financial crisis. Just the day before Martin's death, she searched online for how to use the Uger 6 pistol, the same gun involved in Martin's death and her own head wound. Police found 2 farewell letters, in which Glenna apologized to her children for what she was about to do. She also said goodbye to everyone, indicating her plan to end her life. The Supreme Court identified Glenna as the perpetrator of the crime. Based on all the collected evidence, the investigation was reopened, but something compelled her to shoot her husband first. Martin was killed in the bedroom, and Glenna shot herself in the head in the living room. However, unlike Martin, she did not die instantly and managed to reach the marital bedroom. This can be clarified by talking to her, so the police waited until they could interview her. They continued gathering evidence in the meantime. Martin's family was already convinced that they were not attacked by a stranger. The shooter was his wife, Glenna. Christine Keller, the ex-wife of Martin, was shocked by the events. Although she never thought highly of Glenna, especially because of Glenna's aggressive behavior, but she did not expect this to happen. Then, Christine took her old parrot home to the children. Meanwhile, detectives were finally able to speak with Glenna, who was feeling well. Doctors confirmed that she understood what was happening around her and ready to talk to the detectives. Despite the doctor's positive assessment, but she told the investigators that, in her view, she never wrote farewell letters and did not plan to end her life, let alone kill her husband. Police officers were concerned because Glenna completely denied being involved in the attack on her husband, yet she also claimed she couldn't remember what happened on that tragic day. This inconsistency seemed suspicious and hinted that she might be a suspect, but at that time, they had no solid evidence against her. Glenna was released from the hospital several months later. Meanwhile, the investigation had not uncovered any new evidence. Police were concerned that Glenna's denials and the trauma she had suffered might convince a jury that she was innocent. One day, Christine was awakened by the parrot's voice and went to see it. She was amazed by what it was saying. She decided to use her phone to record the monologue. The parrot kept repeating, "It says, beg Glenna, don't shoot him." This caused Christine's great shock and fear. For a while afterwards, she was even haunted by nightmares. She immediately informed the police and later showed them the video recording. Although the use of a parrot as a witness in court was unprecedented, from that moment on, all of the detectives' suspicions about Glenna's involvement in the case were confirmed. New details of the case have attracted widespread public and media attention. Meanwhile, the investigation continued. The incident was again in the news at the end of June 2016 when police arrested Glenna. They had been collecting evidence to piece together a full case that would clearly show the jury who the killer was and help the Martin family get justice. It was initially thought that the footage of the parrot accusing Glenna would not be used, as it might seem too provocative, and it was uncertain how the jury would react to it. The prosecutor argued that Glenna was in severe financial trouble and could not admit her gambling failures to her spouse. For a long time before the murder, she neglected to pay bills because all her money went to cover debts from her gambling addiction. Eventually, she decided to end her life, writing 2 letters, one to her husband and one to the children. This suggested that Glenna did not initially plan to harm her husband, but something went awry. The final straw was the failed sale of the family home, which was put up for auction without her husband's knowledge. When Martin found out about this from Christine, he likely confronted Glenna. A fierce argument may have ensued, leading her to kill him in a fit of rage before deciding to end her life. Glenna and her lawyer claimed that she had no memory of the shooting or the letter and insisted that she loved her husband too much, so she can't hurt him. They presented a list of medications she was taking to improve cognitive function as evidence of her mental condition. She also denied searching online for how to use a gun, stating that she only used her phone for games and calls. The trial lasted 10 days. The prosecution believed it had a strong case to persuade the jury. However, the jury seemed uncertain, due to the largely circumstantial evidence. Then, a video of the parrot's words was introduced as a crucial piece of evidence. Experts say the parrots form a close relationship with their owner, Martin, and they learn to imitate Martin's voice. Most experts agree that those words left a strong and deep impression on the parrot's memory, so it repeated them over and over again. In the end, this evidence was effective. After 8 hours of deliberation, the jury found 49 years old, Glenna guilty. In this case, the parrot played an important role as a witness, contributing to finding justice. Hello everyone. Today we will learn about case of Jade Panayotu, who was found dead in 2015 in South Africa. The Jade Panayotu case is one of the most shocking and publicized cases due to its seriousness and complex details. Jade's death was not only a tragic loss but also a wake-up call for marital issues, family conflicts, and motive for crime. In this article, we will explore the details of the case, from the initial context to the important developments and controversial outcome. This tragic story involves a married woman who was unaware of the love triangle she was caught in. The events took place in the city formerly known as Port Elizabeth, which was renamed in February 2021. However, we will refer to it by its old name since the incidents occurred before the renaming. Port Elizabeth is known for its beautiful coastal attractions that draw both local and international tourists. The city also features numerous shopping malls and bars. Additionally, it is unique in South Africa for its diverse wildlife, where you can encounter some of the country's largest animals, including the whale shark, leopard, lion, buffalo, rhinoceros, and elephant. In 2004, an 18-year-old named Christopher Panayotu lived in Port Elizabeth after finishing his schooling. Eager to apply his business skills, he sought opportunities within his father's business, which included several stores in the city, such as Bambi's Diner on Market Street. Christopher was known to be a hard worker with a strong sense for business. At a friend's party, Christopher met an appealing girl named Jade, who was also 18. They chat and quickly began dating, falling in love. Jade was a cheerful and kind-hearted individual, aspiring to become a teacher. In 2005, she enrolled in university, and over the next few years, their relationship deepened as they learned more about each other's dreams. While Jade focused on her studies, Christopher launched his first business, a local grocery store in Algoa Park, followed by a second venture, a restaurant and cocktail bar called Infinity, located nearby. By 2011, the couple appeared more serious. Jade graduated and landed a job at a local elementary school while Christopher's businesses thrived. Eventually, Christopher proposed to Jade. They became officially engaged and moved in together. Unfortunately, their happiness was short-lived, as Christopher was involved in an affair at his store, which Jade remained unaware of. 2 years prior to these events, Christopher hired a young woman named Chanel Coots. Initially, their relationship was strictly professional, but by 2012, everything changed. Christopher and Chanel began a secret affair. Not long after, their co-workers noticed extraordinary signs of affection between them. The couple spent nights together in local hotels. And whenever Jade was away, Christopher would invite Chanel to his home. It is unclear how long this affair would have continued, but Christopher's father, Konstantinos Panayotou, eventually discovered the situation. Konstantinos was furious because he had seen Jade as a future daughter-in-law. Over the 8 years he had known her, Konstantinos had come to appreciate Jade's dedication, hard work, and kindness. he recognizing her potential. So, Konstantinos threatened to disinherit Christopher if he did not end the affair or leave Jade for Chanel. As a successful businessman in Port Elizabeth, Konstantinos intended for his business to be passed down to Christopher, who was just beginning his career. After a heated discussion with his father, Christopher promised to end things with Chanel, but he did not follow through, and their affair continued even more intensely. Throughout this time, Jade remained completely unaware of what was happening. Eventually, he and Jade officially married in 2012, becoming Mr. and Mrs. Panayotou. They appeared to be a beautiful couple that many envied, but soon circumstances would change their lives dramatically. Jade received great news. She got a teaching position at a nearby college. In contrast, Christopher's business has been struggling. Revenues in his store and restaurant decreased, with financial indicators were in the red for several months. This has made it difficult for he to support both women in his life. He spent a lot on expensive gifts for Chanel, covered hotel stays, and even bought gifts for his mistress's best friend to keep her silent about their relationship. These significant expenses have impacted his bank account, prompting him to work longer hours to make ends meet. From 2012 to 2015, Christopher grew increasingly distant from his wife, Jade. Business consumed much of his time and energy as he worked to establish it. He felt he always had a reason to be at his store and focused on work. Jade began to realize that she was feeling lonely. Her husband had little time for her. When she spoke with friends, she mentioned how rarely she saw Christopher, and when he was home, he seemed preoccupied with other thoughts. Jade tried to encourage him to have dinner at home, and even she visited the store to spend time together, but these efforts were insufficient. By September 2014, she recognized that her self-control was slipping, and that she was on the verge of a breakdown. On September 21, Jade wrote a letter to herself expressing her feelings. In it, she conveyed her longing for love and a husband who would prioritize her, care for her. She questioned why she couldn't find happiness and why Christopher seemed to hide so much from her, making communication difficult. She felt as though her heart had been taken from her or was in pieces. Writing this letter helped her realize she loved Christopher and how much she wanted to spend time with him. Those close to Jade noticed her loneliness. One day, a best friend was asked by Christopher for birthday gift ideas. She suggested that Jade just wanted to have quality time with him. He recognized the issues in his relationship with Jade, but he still was focused on his business. And he was also distracted by thoughts of another woman. On April 21, 2015, Jade went missing. It was a Tuesday, a normal working day for her. She was expected at work at the college, which was 40 minutes away by car from her home in Wall Glen. Typically, Jade would carpool with her friend and colleague Sherry, and this day should have been no different. Jade left her house at 6:15 a.m. to wait for her friend. However, when Sherry arrived, Jade was not there. Her phone went unanswered, and no one responded to the doorbell. Concerned, Sherry decided to call the police. By 10 a.m., a missing person notice was shared on social media, and many news outlets began reporting on the situation. The police launched a large-scale search that same day, deploying multiple teams and canine units. However, by sunset, they still had no leads on Jade's whereabouts. In that situation, her family offered a reward of 50,000 rand for any information that could help find her, which increased to 150,000 rand by nightfall. As the search for Jade intensified thanks to the efforts of volunteers and caring individuals, tragic news emerged at 10:00 in the morning. A police officer reported that, with the help of his canine unit, he had found a body located in an overgrown area near a gravel road, not far from Kwana Bush. Unfortunately, forensic experts quickly confirmed that the body was indeed Jade's. She was fully clothed, and had suffered attacked by force wounds with 2 to the back and 1 to the head. Additionally, her bank cards and jewelry were missing. Relatives were deeply saddened by the news. Friends and relatives openly wept. Jade's sister nearly fainted when the news reached her. Christopher was there at the time. Students and colleagues mourned the loss of their kind and caring teacher. The heartbreak resonated throughout South Africa and was widely shared on social media. However, one of the most important and pressing questions about Jade's death still needed to be answered. Why did Jade have to die? There appeared to be no clear motive for her murder. The very next day, the police published 2 pictures from surveillance cameras and discovered that, on the day of Jade's death, her bank cards had been used in 2 different locations. The cameras recorded 2 images, but none of Jade's relatives recognized the individuals in the photos. A week later, family and friends gathered for Jade's funeral at a Catholic church in Newton Park. Many people attended to share their grief and say their goodbyes, including numerous students and all of her relatives. Everybody were moved by the heartfelt tributes to Jade, the late wife of Christopher. Meanwhile, Christopher's display of sadness seemed odd and insincere. The investigators was revealed that his expressions of despair had been carefully rehearsed. They think Christopher searched through Google for the text of a farewell speech and came across a dedication from Charles Atkins to his own late wife, so the 2 speeches have a lot in common. While borrowing someone else's speech was inappropriate, it didn't necessarily indicate Christopher's guilt. He was simply struggling to express genuine feelings. Meanwhile, other worrying developments were happening to him. One day before the funeral, the police arrested a man named Sione in connection with Jade's murder. Sione was identified as a bouncer at Christopher's nightclub. Rumors began to circulate that Sione had either orchestrated the crime and confessed while in custody. Another rumor that he claimed Christopher had asked him to hire a hitman to kill Jade, although Sione would not have committed the crime himself, but he knew a couple of friends who might agree to such this request. That marked a significant breakthrough in the investigation. But there was still no evidence linking Christopher to the crime. The police needed more than just rumors to substantiate the serious accusation against him. To gather more evidence, the police devised a plan. They would release Sione from custody on the condition that he speak with Christopher, record any confession regarding the murder of Jade. In exchange, the police promised to ease Sione's sentence and negotiate on many other issues. The next day, Sione called Christopher, and their conversation led the police to draw important conclusions. Christopher was arrested 2 hours after the phone call. Following this new information, 3 additional suspects were apprehended. While Christopher denied any involvement in his wife's death, the investigation revealed that he had asked his bodyguard from the club to arrange the murder. Sione had then recruited 3 hitmen for the task. Christopher instructed them to execute the plan early in the morning at 6:30, while Jade was waiting for a co-worker who was supposed to drive her to work. He intended to stage the murder as a robbery at the Glen Walls gates, planning to steal all her possessions. The execution date was originally set for April 20, 2015. However, while the hired killers were preparing to carry out the order, one of their girlfriends showed up, prompting them to postpone the execution to another day. This delay upset Christopher, who insisted that the execution take place as soon as possible. Therefore, the following day was scheduled. On April 21, Jade arrived outside her village at 6:15 a.m., where 3 killers were already waiting in a rented car just a short distance away. They decided against killing her immediately due to concerns about potential witnesses. Instead, they opted to kidnap her and take her to a different location to carry out the murder. Jade was taken to the back seat of the car, which drove northwest from the village for about 30 minutes. Upon arrival, the killers pulled her from the car and attacked her 3 times by force. She died from the third bullet. One of the criminals then went to a nearby ATM and withdrew 1,000 rand, approximately $100. Later that day, they attempted to withdraw cash again, but the transaction failed due to an incorrect PIN. Both withdrawal attempts were recorded on surveillance cameras. The magistrate's court will try all four criminals together, excluding the bouncer Sione, who has already faced a different punishment. Mysteriously, before the trial began, one of the hitmen died, leaving the remaining two and Christopher to face charges for the crime. On October 11, 2015, the trial against Christopher and two mercenaries began. The prosecution argued that Christopher murdered Jade because he could not afford to support both his wife and his mistress, leading him to want her out of the picture. In contrast, Christopher's defense claimed that he had a kind heart and would never commit such an act, especially since he had just bought a new house for himself and Jade. They asserted that Christopher had no reason to kill his wife. Christopher's mistress, Chanel, testified about the expensive gifts he had given her and confirmed that she had spent the night with him in the penthouse while Jade was away. Evidence was presented showing also their illicit encounters at local hotels well. The prosecution presented various pieces of evidence, including phone calls between the hired killers and Christopher's bouncers, ATM photos, GPS coordinates, hidden cars, and other incriminating materials. On November 2, 2017, when turned 31, Christopher Panayotou was found guilty of murdering his wife. Investigative agency was revealed that he was seeking a loan of 2.5 million rand, which he had no intention of using for his wife or mistress. The judge concluded Christopher regretted his marriage to Jade, so killed her to cut costs and reduce his ever-growing debt. Because of his cruel actions, the judge sentenced Christopher to life in prison without mercy. The two hired killers also received life sentences, while Sione awaited his own sentence. Unfortunately, Luthando Sione's testimony was hostile. After a series of trials, Sione was convicted by the Gqeberha High Court on 25 November 2021 and was sentenced to life imprisonment on 26 November 2021. The story ultimately focuses on themes of betrayal and greed. Jade was a genuinely good person with a heart of gold. She was dedicated to her cause and the people around her, always maintaining a positive attitude, a vibrant personality, and a beautiful smile. She deserved much more in life than what her husband took from her. On December 9, 2019, Christopher's father, who opposed his son's affair with Chanel, tragically lost his life. He was shot multiple times near his store while closing for the night, and his car was stolen. The murder of Christopher Panayotou overshadowed earlier events and devastated two families. This tragedy stemmed from the actions of a selfish man who prioritized his pride and money over his wife's life. It remains uncertain whether he bears responsibility for his father's death. Society hopes that Christopher will spend the rest of his life in prison, filled with regret and despair. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Angela Wilder. Angela Wilder was born in 1985 in San Diego, California, USA, as the youngest daughter in her family. She had an older sister named Cree, and they were very close. Both of her parents were in the military, so the family often moved. This often leads to tension within their families. Eventually, Angela's parents decided to divorce while she was still in school. Angela's mother met someone new, and they moved with him to Phoenix City, Alabama, a small town with a population of 40,000. After the move, her mother left the military. The family became regular attendees of the local church, as they had always been religious. In high school, Angela met Christopher Jackson, and they quickly developed feelings for each other. They began dating, marking Angela's first love. However, the relationship was short-lived because Angela prioritized her education. She needed to move to attend the University of South Alabama. Christopher found the breakup difficult as he genuinely loved Angela, but he didn't want to stand in the way of her dreams. In 2004, Angela met a preacher's son named Daniel. At that time, she was still in university but quickly became involved in a relationship with him. Before long, Angela became pregnant, and the couple decided to marry. They had a wedding and soon welcomed a daughter. However, financial struggles and work stress took a toll on their relationship. Angela's feelings for Daniel faded quickly, and she realized he wasn't the partner she wanted for life. After 2 years of marriage, Angela decided to file for divorce and seek full custody of their daughter. After graduating from university, Angela returned to her hometown and lived in her parents' house. Her mother and sister supported her by helping take care of her daughter. During one visit to the local church, she met Richie Wilder, a former schoolmate. Richie has a hot temper and often causes trouble. Many people believe that the reason is because he was raised in an unhappy family. His father was an alcoholic who often mistreated his mother, who couldn't do anything about it. While many people avoided Richie, Angela believed she saw a different side of him and thought she could bring out his best qualities. Richie and Angela formed a close relationship and they started dating. Angela mentioned that Richie got along well with her daughter and treated her kindly. However, Angela's relatives quickly observed negative changes in her behavior at the start of her relationship with Richie. They noticed that Angela became quieter, more difficult to understand, and more stressed. Despite everyone's worry and advice to keep her distance from him, but Angela did not heed their warnings. In January 2009, Richie and Angela got married. Richie took Angela and her daughter to the family home, and they moved to the city of Minot, North Dakota. It's a small town with about 40,000 people, a very tight-knit local community, and includes armed forces facilities. There is also a military base where Richie was stationed. In 2010, Angela found out she was pregnant. During that time, she started working at a supply store on the military base. Some people close to Richie and Angela noticed issues in their relationship. Angela's co-workers noticed that Richie was often rude and aggressive towards her. He often insults Angela and makes her cry, even though she is very vulnerable. She later revealed that he was not only cruel to her but also to her daughter. It was discovered that he regularly abused the whole family but did so without leaving any marks. This abuse continued for years. The couple had 2 children, a boy and a girl. When Angela reached her breaking point, she officially reported the violence to the police. When the investigation started, all of Richie's colleagues and the military base management supported him. He convinced people that his wife, Angela, was unstable and had mental health issues. Angela lacked solid evidence of her husband's mistreatment, and the backing Richie received from the military base management helped cover up the case. Despite this, Angela was determined to end the relationship while keeping custody of their children. While trying to prove Richie was cruel, Angela herself faced accusations from him. Richie alleged that Angela had anger management issues, and he proved it thanks to the support of his colleagues. Ultimately, Angela, a mother of 2, was referred to an anger management specialist and prescribed sedatives. Friends familiar with Angela insisted she never had such issues, and no one had seen her act aggressively. They believed Richie orchestrated the situation to discredit her with the authorities. However, Angela still followed the treatment regimen, with the aim of understanding and dealing with her condition. Around 2 weeks after, Richie and Angela reconciled, but peace in their relationship was short-lived. Angela soon filed for divorce, and their marriage ended in May 2012. Richie faced a military tribunal. Despite opposition from the officers at the military base, Angela succeeded in proving the violence against her and the children. Due to uncovered family issues and deceit, Richie was dismissed from service. Angela did not want to share custody and planned to move with the children back to Alabama. This decision angered Richie. He wanted to maintain a relationship with the children, visit them regularly, and have them over on weekends. This disagreement led to frequent arguments between the ex-spouses. Richie consistently opposed the idea and even threatened Angela. During the World Cup, Angela confided her plan to her loved ones, and despite opposition, she went through with her decision and moved to another state. Besides, Richie also relocated to a nearby city within the state and began working as a junior staff member at a hospital. In this new city, he met Cynthia Becker, a kindergarten teacher. They began dating, and their relationship quickly progressed. Eventually, they got married and started a family. Despite this, Richie remained troubled by the custody arrangement of his children, as his ex-wife, Angela, had been granted full custody. He maintained contact with his son and daughter primarily through phone calls, but the disputes between them persisted. Despite everything that happened, Angela seemed genuinely happy. She had started dating Christopher Jackson again, her first boyfriend from high school. Previously, they had broken up so she could pursue her education. After many years of separation, the love between them burned stronger than ever. Angela told her family that she had finally found someone with whom she felt warmth, and they had a son. Angela and Christopher were planning their wedding, and she was pregnant again. She had no idea she would soon have to fight for her life. On the evening of November 13, 2015, Christopher went to work for his night shift at a local 24-hour Walmart. He didn't have a car, so Angela usually picked him up after his shift at 7 a.m. However, on that night, Angela stopped responding to his calls and messages. They typically stayed in touch during his shifts. But communication ended around 3 a.m. when Angela texted that she heard a noise outside and felt she was being followed. Christopher only saw the message 2 hours later because he was busy with work. Concerned, he tried calling Angela, but she didn't answer. He assumed she might have fallen asleep or gone to a clinic in the morning for pregnancy tests. But when Angela didn't arrive to pick him up as planned, Christopher began to worry then. At the time, Angela was enrolled in a nursing program at Minot University and had recently discovered she was pregnant again. Christopher thought she might have gone to the hospital if she felt unwell or if their son was sick, which might explain why she wasn't responding to his calls and messages. Even though he understood her possible situation, the strangeness didn't stop there. Normally, she would immediately call Christopher in such a case. If he didn't answer, she will at least send a text message to inform him of any problems. So, he was confused about why Angela suddenly stopped all communication, which was not like her. Christopher kept calling, but his calls always went to voicemail. Too worried, he rushed back home, then he knocked on the bedroom window where Angela might be sleeping. However, when he saw the back door, he realized something terrible might have happened that night. There were signs of a break-in, as if the door had been forcefully knocked down. Christopher looked inside and called Angela's name several times, but there was no response. He didn't enter the house, fearing something bad might be inside. Instead, he immediately called 911 to report the situation. He explained that Angela hadn't answered his phone for several hours and didn't pick him up from work as usual. He asked the dispatcher if he could go inside to find out what happened, but the dispatcher advised against it, suggesting there might be a criminal inside waiting for another victim. Christopher was instructed to wait outside for the police. He urged them to hurry because Angela was pregnant, and he was concerned for her and their unborn child's safety. The police arrived about 20 minutes later. During this time, Christopher waited outside for them. He could only enter the house once they arrived. From the outside, everything appeared normal, the furniture was in place, and everything was clean and tidy. However, Angela still did not respond to his calls. When the officers approached the main bedroom and opened the door, the reason for Angela's silence became clear. One officer turned on the light and discovered a horrifying scene. There was so much blood that the bed linen items were all mixed into a red mess. On the bed lay 30-year-old Angela, showing no signs of life. She was stabbed multiple times. During the attack, Angela's 2-year-old son was in the house. He remained silent, and no sounds came from his room. Christopher, alarmed, rushed to check on him, but thankfully, he was just sleeping and unharmed, as he was not the killer's target. The other children were with their grandmother that day. Christopher immediately accused Richie of being the one who killed Angela, having no other suspects for who could have harmed Angela so brutally. She had no other enemies. After marrying Richie, Angela had a daughter and a son, who were 10 and 4 years old at the time of the tragedy. Although the judge awarded Angela full custody, but Richie had visitation rights and to be involved in their children's lives. Richie took the kids away for the weekend and intended to contest custody so they could live with him forever. Angela opposed this due to his cruel nature, leading to constant arguments between them. Later, there is evidence that Richie may have been involved in the murder of his ex-wife, Angela. For example, Crystal, Angela's sister, informed the police that Richie had aggressively entered Angela's house after their divorce and said that if he wanted, he could reach her. However, Richie never used physical force in public, so these claims remained unproven. The forensic expert concluded that by the time Angela was found, she had been killed with over 1,000 stab wounds. She had fought desperately against the attack, as evidenced by the cuts on her hands, likely from trying to defend herself. The police quickly observed that valuables in the house were still intact, indicating that the attacker was not motivated by theft but by a desire to kill Angela. Investigating her personal life, the police noted that Angela and Richie had a hostile relationship and were frequently in conflict. Richie had been discharged from military service for violence against Angela and their children. Relatives of Angela confirmed that the relationship between her and Richie was very strained. Angela avoided interacting with Richie when he came to pick up the children, so Christopher usually handled the exchanges. Christopher detailed the issues between Angela and Richie, expressing his dislike for Richie's aggressive behavior, although he managed to avoid direct conflicts with him. After gathering all the information, the detectives focused on Richie, who became the main suspect. Richie agreed to speak with them and firmly denied any involvement in the incident. Since the evidence collected had not yet been analyzed, they had nothing to confront him with, so they continued questioning him. Richie provided an alibi, stating that he left work around 7 p.m. and went home. His new wife, Cynthia, confirmed that Richie was with her at home the entire night. However, the investigators noticed several wounds on Richie's hands and face that resembled scratches, which could be defensive wounds inflicted by Angela during a struggle. Richie claimed these injuries were from playing with a child. The detectives doubted his explanation and decided to review CCTV footage from the area, requesting the recordings. After reviewing the footage from the cameras that might have captured the criminal arriving to commit the murder, Richie's car was not seen. However, this didn't mean much as the attacker could have gone unnoticed. The police collected DNA samples from Richie for testing and obtained a warrant to search his car. The car's interior was extremely clean, except for a small red stain on the front passenger seat door. Forensic experts collected these materials for examination. Suspicions about Richie increased. He was asked to take a polygraph test. Although a polygraph is not admissible in court, detectives wanted to observe his reaction and behavior during the test. Initially, Richie agreed, but he never showed up for it. Despite his refusal, This was insufficient to arrest him or press charges, so investigators decided to look into his background more thoroughly. All the employees at the hospital where Richie works were aware of the investigation. Despite this, he was fired a few weeks after the investigation started. A complaint was filed against him for he pushing an elderly patient. Richie later justified his actions by claiming nervous tension caused by pressure from police officers. Meanwhile, detectives were gathering more evidence of the Richie's involvement in Angela's murder. DNA traces were found that matched samples from the suspected killer. Richie, suggesting that he was the one Angela had fought off in her bedroom. Richie declared that maybe the recently time he picked up the kids he accidentally left a trace of DNA there. However, this explanation seemed implausible since the last meeting was with Christopher, and he and Angela had no contact with each other. The examination confirmed that the drop of blood in Richie's car belonged to Angela's. Richie claimed it might have been from when they were still together, as Angela allegedly had blood pressure issues and occasionally had nosebleeds. However, the blood appeared very fresh. His explanation seemed like attempts to mislead the investigation, revealed many contradictions in his testimony. The police finally arrested Richie for Angela's murder, but he denied all the charges. In March, the police received an unexpected confession from Richie. He mentioned that he had no criminal record and a good background, claiming he wasn't guilty of the crime. However, he was willing to talk about who was actually involved in Angela's death. According to him, during one of their meetings, Christopher proposed an unusual deal. Richie recounted that Christopher suspected Angela of cheating and was convinced she was seeing her lover while he worked night shifts. Christopher suggested catching Angela in the act, which would also give Richie leverage in a custody battle for the children. Richie agreed, and that evening, he called Christopher to pick him up from work. Richie explained that he and Christopher went to Angela's house to confront her and her lover. When they entered the bedroom, they only found Angela, who was sleeping peacefully. Despite this, Christopher unexpectedly drew a knife they had brought for self-defense and attacked her, stabbing her multiple times. Angela woke up and tried to defend herself, but she couldn't. Richie confessed that he was in shock, but he unable to help her. Richie watched the attack, but was too stunned and unable to intervene. Afterward, Christopher warned him not to tell anyone, threatening to kill him if he did. Once Richie regained his senses, he checked Angela's pulse by touching her neck. Suddenly, Angela made a final attempt to fight back, grabbing him with her hands and scratching him before collapsing once more. Terrified by Christopher's warning, fled the scene and remained silent until the situation directly affected him. Richie said he did not tell this story during his first meeting with the police because he was scared. He stated that Christopher kept threatening him and his family, but no one believed this claim Richie's. The police reviewed the store's surveillance footage and confirmed that Christopher was working the night shift during Angela's death. He was on Marta Street, visible to cameras from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m., and couldn't leave his job. Moreover, Christopher confirmed that he took a taxi home in the morning, and this information was recorded on his mobile phone. Once Richie realized how absurd his story sounded, he began telling more incredible tales. He finally claimed to have witnessed Angela being murdered by a killer wearing a black mask, allegedly hired by an enemy of Angela. He even tried to accuse some of his fellow inmates of attacking Angela, but he couldn't clearly explain the incident of that night. He claimed the killers were overwhelmed with guilt and confessed to him during a private conversation. However, all of this turned out to be fabricated. It was revealed that Richie even paid $500,000 to a prisoner to plead guilty on his behalf. When no one agreed to take the blame, Richie attempted to pay a similar amount to arrange for the murder of Christopher to keep him silent. Fortunately, his fellow inmate ignored this offer. One night, while Richie was in custody awaiting trial, correctional officers noticed him acting suspiciously. After searching his cell, they found a broom handle sharpened on one end like a spear. It was clear he was planning an escape and had made a weapon for this purpose. Fortunately, the plan was discovered in time, and the guards began to watch him more closely. As a result, he was never able to carry out any of his plans. Richie's behavior in prison was considered during his trial, and in addition to the murder charges, he faced punishment for attempting to escape. The trial for Angela Wilder's murder began in December 2016. Despite having enough evidence to convict Richie, forensic experts presented the accusations. Angela's body was found on the morning of November 14, 2015. She was lying face up on the bed, covered in blood. A drop of blood found in Richie's car matched the DNA of Angela. Additionally, DNA under her fingernails matched Richie's, providing irrefutable evidence of his guilt. Although Richie's lawyer tried his best to defend his client, the case documents provided by the prosecutor's office were too convincing. Consequently, the jury found Richie Wilder guilty of premeditated murder. A woman who knew Richie well insisted from the start that the police had made a mistake. She argued that they only focused on Richie due to past conflicts, overlooking other possibilities. She maintained that Richie couldn't be guilty because he had spent the night with her from November 13th to 14th. She believes that he is a trustworthy person who loves children and does not commit domestic violence. However, evidence clearly confirmed his guilt. Richie Wilder received a life sentence in prison without the chance of parole and an extra 5 years for trying to escape. Overnight, Angela's children lost both parents. Richie's new wife, Cynthia, who had hoped for a happy family, could no longer be with her husband. After the trial, Cynthia expressed her disbelief, considering it an injustice. She insisted that Richie was wrongly framed and imprisoned. The case might have ended there, but a friend of Cynthia's kept an eye out. Cynthia frequently talked to this friend after Richie was imprisoned, often steering the conversation towards Angela's murder and the prison situation. During one discussion, Cynthia mentioned that Angela was supposed to be shot with a gun her husband had. But he changed his mind and used a knife instead. This raised suspicions for Cynthia's friend. It seemed that Cynthia felt no pity at all, and at the same time she knew more than she was letting on about the murder. The police asked this friend of Cynthia's to let them wiretap his chat meeting next with Cynthia, and he agreed. Later, during a heartfelt conversation, he asked why Cynthia was so upset about the crime involving Angela. She clarified that it wasn't the crime itself that bothered her, but the fact that Richie was caught and imprisoned. Cynthia expressed frustration that Richie should have taken more drastic actions like cutting off Angela's fingers, burning down her house, or destroying all evidence to avoid arrest. Cynthia was also angry about a drop of blood the police found inside Richie's car. She confessed that they had worked together to clean up the traces. Cynthia often discusses the importance of committing crimes perfectly, so as to never get caught by the police. Cynthia admitted that the murder of Angela had been planned by both she and Richie for a long time. Richie did not want to share custody of the children with Angela's and saw the crime as the only solution. Cynthia helped him plan it but did not participate in the attack itself. Later, this recording was given to the police. Cynthia was arrested in 2018 and the trial began. She claimed that everything on the recording was a lie and that she was set up. According to Angela, she wanted to impress a friend because she hoped to start a relationship with him, so she thought this story would make a strong impression. Law enforcement officials stated that Cynthia was the only person who knew the situation and had the ability to prevent the murder, but she chose not to act. The prosecutor's office offered Cynthia's a plea deal for a reduced sentence of 25 years, which she declined. She believed she could avoid responsibility due to the lack of evidence apart from a confession. She maintained her innocence regarding. However, a recording revealed that Cynthia actively participated in planning and preparing for the massacre. She also assisted in disposing of evidence, overseeing the murder, and even attempted to help Richie escape from prison in 2016. Authorities documented these activities and planned to file new charges against her. Cynthia was found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder and attempting to escape, resulting in a life sentence without parole, similar to Richie, who was already serving a sentence. Both Richie and Cynthia appealed their convictions, but their appeals were denied. After the trials, Angela's mother became the legal guardian of the children. The children moved to Jacksonville, Florida, to live with her in September 2017. The court initially ruled that Richie could not have contact with his children. However, this decision was later revised, allowing the children to decide on contact once they reach adulthood. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Pamela Buchbinder. Jacob Nolan was born in 1991 into a wealthy family in Miami, Florida. As the third child in the family, he received a lot of love from his parents. They realized that he was different from his peers. However, at the age of 5, Jacob was diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. When Jacob turned 15, his family noticed that he was experiencing significant mood swings. Despite this, he was doing well in school. He created an educational smartphone app and won a competition in Miami. However, a month later, Jacob couldn't get out of bed, had no motivation to do anything, even stand up. They finally brought him to a doctor, who diagnosed him with depression and anxiety. At 17, Jacob expressed that he no longer wanted to live. His parents noticed his unstable behavior and mental state, prompting them to take him to a hospital, where he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. This serious mental illness involves extreme mood swings, ranging from depression to emotional outbursts. Those affected feel trapped in their own thoughts. After finishing high school, Jacob enrolled in college while continuing his treatment. Throughout this time, he saw various psychiatrists who prescribed increasingly stronger medications. From the ages of 17 to 20, Jacob underwent numerous treatment courses, took 5 to 6 pills daily, and tried around 30 different medications, yet none seemed to help. By 2012, at 21 years old, Jacob was still deteriorating. His parents were deeply concerned and unsure of what steps to take next. Then, one day, a relative from New York, Pamela Buchbinder, called with an offer of help. Jacob's parents were relieved, thinking they had gotten help. However, they had no idea of the challenges that were about to come to their family. Pamela, a 43-year-old psychotherapist, lives in Chelsea, Manhattan, with her 4-year-old son, Calder. She and Jacob Nolan are cousins with a 22-year age gap. Jacob was the godfather of her son. In 2012, Pamela offered to help Jacob by inviting him to move from Florida to her apartment. While living with her, she provided him with therapy sessions and prescribed medication. In exchange for her help, Jacob took responsibility for Calder's care. Jacob trusted her completely. In one photo, Jacob is seen lying in bed with Pamela, laughing, which shows he feels comfortable and at home with her. However, it's important to note that this relationship is not just familial. Pamela is also Jacob's psychotherapist. Jacob cared deeply for Calder and treated him like a son. He wanted to set a positive example for his godson of what a real man should be like. This approach seemed to work, as Jacob, who had struggled with mental illness for years, seemed to be stabilizing, joking frequently and always smiling. Unfortunately, this happiness did not last long. Over time, Pamela began to frequently express her frustrations with her ex-partner, Michael Weiss, Calder's father. Pamela ended her relationship with Michael shortly after the birth of her son. Michael Weiss, 38, is a psychotherapist. On the surface, he and Pamela appear to be a happy, loving couple. However, beneath the perfect exterior, their relationship is in trouble. Both Michael and Pamela have reported domestic violence to the police. Pamela once attacked Michael with a piece of broken glass. Michael received medical treatment, stitched up the wound, and later that day, he reported the incident to the police. As a result, Pamela was arrested and charged with assault. However, she was soon forgiven by Michael and the couple reconciled, but a few months later, Pamela went to the police again, claiming that Michael had threatened her and wanted to kill her. She later retracted that statement. Although they were never officially married, Michael and Pamela's relationship lasted about 4 years. After they had a son in 2008, Pamela finally ended the relationship. Their tumultuous relationship ended, but a new conflict arose. The custody battle for their son, Calder. Every day, Pamela tells Jacob about Michael in insulting words. She complained that Michael refused to pay child support and even accused him of doing bad things to their son, Calder, during his visits. On the morning of November 12, 2012, Jacob was awakened by Pamela's gentle touch. She climbed into his bed, caressed his back, and whispered sweet nothings in his ear. She told him that Jacob was her savior. He was the best person in the world because no one understood her like he did. However, her affectionate mood quickly changed. She took a black sports bag from her closet and stuffed it with a long-handled hammer and a kitchen knife. Overwhelmed with emotion, she began to cry and told Jacob that today was the day he needed to face Michael. A diagram showing the entrance to the multi-story office building where Michael is seeing patients is written on a piece of paper. Jacob stands up, grabs his bag, stuffs the diagram into his pocket, and leaves. Before leaving, he washes his face and declares, "Today is the day our lives will change for the better because Michael will be eliminated." Jacob arrived at the right high-rise in Manhattan. He circled the building, observing it from different angles. Entering through the service entrance, he checked in on the first floor, provided his real name, and mentioned he was going to the tutoring center. He was allowed inside. Jacob took the elevator to the 12th floor and made his way to Michael's office. He heard a patient inside and decided to wait in the hallway for the appointment to finish. Soon, the patient would exit, leaving Michael alone. While waiting, Jacob felt increasingly anxious. Doubts flooded his mind, making him question whether he was making the right decisions. At one point, he thought about abandoning everything and running home. However, the idea of returning to Pamela without completing her request and disappointing her was stronger than his fear. Jacob realized he had no choice but to continue. After the patient left, Jacob entered the office and informed Michael that Pamela had asked him to collect financial documents for the Calder's kindergarten. As Michael searched for the documents, Jacob asked to use the restroom. In the restroom, Jacob took out a knife and hid it in his pocket, then retrieved a large hammer. He exited the bathroom and approached Michael, swinging the hammer at him. Thankfully, Michael reacted quickly, ducking just in time to avoid a serious injury, though the hammer struck his shoulder. Jacob then pulled out the knife, and a struggle ensued. Michael, being physically larger, quickly fought back. The people around heard Michael's cry for help. They mistakenly thought that the doctor was being attacked by an unstable mental patient. They quickly called 911 to report the incident. Before the police arrived, Jacob and Michael, feeling exhausted, sat down in the hallway. Jacob took out his phone and took a selfie, which he sent to Pamela along with a question about what he should do next. But he never received a reply. The situation made him feel very strange. The police and ambulance arrived shortly after. The injured men were rushed to the hospital for treatment. Fortunately, none of them had life-threatening injuries. Michael was treated and sent home the same day. Jacob's injuries were more serious and the doctors noted that he was unstable. Jacob was arrested in the hospital while he was receiving treatment. He sent a detailed message to Pamela about what had happened to him and Michael. Although she initially ignored his message, she eventually asked which hospital he was in. When Pamela arrived, she was not allowed to see Jacob, who was already handcuffed to the bed. Jacob spent 4 days in the hospital before being taken to a jail cell after his discharge. He was released on bail of $200,000 while awaiting trial. Jacob was permitted to fly from New York to his parents' home in Florida. Several weeks after the incident, Michael filed a lawsuit against Pamela, accusing her of conspiring to kill him. Michael argued that Pamela was dangerous and insisted that their son should live with him. He presented surveillance footage from a hardware store showing that the day before the attack, Pamela and Jacob had purchased a hammer together, and Pamela had paid in cash. Pamela denied any involvement, saying that she had only asked Jacob to retrieve some financial documents from Michael, but had not asked Jacob to attack. Although she admitted to giving Jacob a knife, she explained that it was to protect her son Calder, since Calder's daycare was on the first floor of the building where Michael worked. Shortly thereafter, the judge transferred custody of Calder to Michael Weiss, granting him full custody and banning Pamela from contacting her son for 5 years. A few months after the incident, Jacob accused Pamela of orchestrating the attack on Michael. He claimed that Pamela meticulously planned the attack, and that she had instructed Jacob to approach Michael and hit him with a hammer. Jacob previously said that Pamela had been psychologically manipulating him. Pamela repeatedly told him that Michael was harming her son, but there was no evidence to support her claim. No one ever witnessed Michael harming Calder or saying anything negative to his son. In fact, relatives testified that Michael cared deeply for his son. Pamela was someone Jacob trusted completely and considered very close. Meanwhile, Jacob's parents were in despair. They fully supported their son and claimed that Pamela had brainwashed him using psychological techniques from her practice. In March 2016, Jacob Nolan's trial began. He claimed that Pamela had forced him to attack Michael Weiss. Prosecutors described Jacob as a spoiled child from a wealthy family, noting that he provided 3 inconsistent accounts of the event and appeared confused. When the police first arrived at Michael's office, Jacob pointed at Michael and accused him of attacking Jacob with a knife. However, during questioning, Jacob claimed that he had never used a hammer in Michael's office. He explained that he had brought the hammer for self-defense because he was afraid of Michael. In his third statement, Jacob said that Michael had attacked him first. Prosecutors presented a key piece of evidence regarding the motive behind the attack on Michael. Just before the attack, Michael had purchased a $1.5 million life insurance policy, naming his son Calder as the beneficiary. However, 3 days before the attack, on November 9, 2012, Michael had agreed to add Pamela as a co-beneficiary and allow her to manage Calder's money. Jacob claimed that this was the first time he had learned about the insurance policy and claimed that Pamela had never shared her financial affairs with him. During the trial, it was revealed that Jacob had purchased plastic zip ties from a hardware store in addition to the hammer found with Pamela. Jacob confirmed this and made a shocking admission. Pamela had asked him not only to kill Michael but also to ensure he suffered before dying. She described brutal acts that Jacob was supposed to carry out. Jacob refused to inflict such extreme cruelty, but he agreed to kill Michael. Jacob mentioned that Pamela initially wanted to create a homemade weapon using an air pistol, but when they got to the hardware store, they decided it would be easier and more effective to use a hammer instead. Jacob's attorney focused on proving that Jacob was insane. However, proving that he was insane is quite difficult. Currently, there is no test that can reveal a person's thoughts and feelings at the time of the crime. Evaluations are usually based on interviews, police reports, medical records, and sometimes social media messages. Often, two different psychiatrists can give conflicting opinions, which can confuse judges and juries. Although mental illness can affect emotions, thoughts, and behavior, throughout the trial, Jacob clearly understood his actions and admitted that they were wrong and bad. He did not appear insane in court. He was handsome, articulate, well-dressed, and answered questions clearly. Pamela was not called to testify at the trial by either the prosecution or the defense. Jacob Nolan, who had a mental disorder, faced skepticism regarding his claim that Pamela was the one who initiated the attack. Before the trial, Jacob's lawyers hired detectives to locate Pamela, but they were unable to find her, and her apartment was empty. In March 2016, after a 2-week trial, 24-year-old Jacob Nolan was convicted of attempted murder and second-degree assault, receiving a sentence of 9.5 years in prison. Jacob was very upset about his sentence, stating, "It's unfair. I'm not a danger to society." His parents regretted their decision to send him to live with their Pamela, believing it was their biggest mistake. On October 19, 2017, nearly 5 years after Michael's attack, police located Pamela in Sullivan, New York. The Manhattan District Attorney charged her with conspiracy to murder Michael Weiss. At the time of Pamela's arrest, police found her passport and Calder's birth certificate. Pamela was arrested and maintained her innocence. She hired 2 of New York's top attorneys, who claimed that the video showing her doing laundry and the video of her buying the hammer had been edited. They claimed that Pamela was a highly educated psychotherapist and would never have considered organizing a murder. In the 5 years after Jacob's attack, Pamela lived a normal life. She worked and rented an apartment. She did not attempt to go into hiding or flee the country, but she avoided reporters and did not comment on Jacob's crimes. Pamela was detained before her trial at the notorious Rikers Island prison in New York, where she spent 5 years due to legal issues. On September 7, 2022, during a pre-trial hearing, Pamela made a statement agreeing to plead guilty in return for a lighter sentence. However, a month later, she decided to withdraw her plea. Pamela's trial took place. The jury found Pamela Buchbinder guilty and she was sentenced to 11 years in prison. After the verdict was read, she looked sadly at her relative, who blew her kisses. Jacob and Pamela are currently serving their sentences in separate correctional facilities in New York. Jacob is scheduled to be released in 2024, while Pamela will be released in 2027. Jacob maintains regular phone contact with his parents. He has expressed remorse for his actions and reflects on them every night. He even wishes to meet Michael Weiss in person to apologize and seek forgiveness. When Pamela is released, her son, Calder, will be 19. He is currently being raised by his biological father, Michael, who still works in Manhattan. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Maria Munoz. Maria Munoz was born on January 25, 1989, in Puerto Rico to Marisol Rodriguez and Jorge Luis Munoz. She was the middle child of 3, along with her siblings Marisol Munoz and Peter Hernandez. Tragically, Maria's mother passed away when she was young, leaving her to take on a significant caregiving role for her brothers. It was during this time that Maria met Joel Pellet, a nursing student who was 11 years older than her. Despite their age difference, they got married in 2011. After their wedding, they relocated to Laredo, Texas, where Joel landed a high-paying job as a nurse anesthetist at a local hospital. Their new financial stability allowed them to live a life of luxury, complete with expensive cars and exotic vacations. By the time Maria was 31, she had left her job to focus on raising their 2 young sons. As a devoted stay-at-home mom, Maria cherished every moment with her children and supported her husband Joel, who was 40 at the time. Maria was a devoted mother who spent quality time with her children, taking them to the park and reading to them before bed. She also made time for her own interests, like playing the piano. Despite her happiness at home, she harbored a long-held dream of returning to school and becoming a nurse again. From the outside, it seemed like Maria and her husband Pellet had a perfect relationship. He would frequently share photos of his family with friends and colleagues, boasting about how wonderful they were. However, beneath the surface, things started to take a turn in 2018, after Maria gave birth to their second son. Those close to Pellet began to notice a change in his behavior. Pellet underwent a physical transformation, losing weight and gaining muscle. He also became more outgoing and flirtatious with other women, behavior that didn't align with what was expected of a married man. On social media, he started removing photos of his wife and children, replacing them with pictures of himself alone. This new online persona made it seem like he was single and carefree, without the responsibilities of a husband and father. In 2020, Maria's life was turned upside down when she discovered her husband, Pellet, was having an affair with a surgical nurse named Janet Arando. Despite her suspicions, finding airline tickets he had purchased for a trip to Europe with his mistress was the final confirmation of his infidelity. Maria was consumed by heartbreak, depression, and a deep sense of betrayal. She felt lost and alone, struggling to come to terms with the fact that her 10-year marriage was built on lies. To cope with her emotional turmoil, Maria began seeing a therapist who prescribed medication to support her mental health. As Maria grappled with her emotions, she found solace in writing journals, using them as an outlet to process her thoughts and feelings. However, the situation continued to deteriorate, and on September 19, 2020, Maria confronted her husband's infidelity head-on by visiting Janet's house, where she found Pellet's car parked in the driveway. Maria confronted Pellet at his house, forcing him to choose between her and Janet. He chose Janet, and during the ensuing argument, Janet called the police. However, Maria and Pellet had left by the time the police arrived. The police then called Maria while she was driving with Pellet, and they could hear him yelling at her in the background. When they got home, Pellet's anger escalated, and he punched a hole in Maria's car windshield, displaying a concerning level of force and anger. The next morning, Maria sent Pellet a text message stating her intention to hire a lawyer to help resolve their situation. Pellet replied, suggesting they handle things without lawyers, as he believed it would be too expensive. However, just a few hours later, Pellet appeared to have a change of heart. He sent Maria an emotional email expressing his deep sadness and inner turmoil. He requested a sincere and calm conversation with Maria, free from arguments. Maria agreed to meet with him, and they scheduled a meeting for 5 p.m. the following night. Before meeting her friend Yasmin Martinez, Maria was extremely anxious and messaged her about their plans. Unfortunately, the encounter ended in a terrifying way. On September 22, 2020, Maria's husband, Pellet, frantically called 911, saying his wife might have taken some prescription pills and was not breathing. Officer crews arrived at their house around 1:40 a.m., with his body cam recording the scene. Pellet was found performing CPR on Maria at the top of the stairs near their bedroom, still wearing his green hospital scrubs. Their 2 sons were sleeping nearby. When paramedics arrived, they took over CPR efforts while first responders worked to save Maria's life. An officer asked Pellet about the pills Maria had supposedly taken. He quickly retrieved a bottle from the nearby bathroom medicine cabinet and handed it to the officers. The bottle was later found to contain a prescription for clonazepam, a medication used to treat acute anxiety, panic attacks, and epilepsy. Benzodiazepines, like Kazam, calm the nervous system to produce a relaxing effect. However, when an officer examined the pill bottle, he discovered that it was prescribed to Pellet, not Maria. What caught his attention was that the bottle had been returned to the medicine cabinet, which is unusual in overdose cases, where the bottle is typically found near the person. The officer's body camera footage showed Pellet picking up the pill container from the floor and putting it in his pocket. This raised suspicions, as it seemed like Pellet might be hiding something. Another suspicious finding was a needle catheter on the stairs, which was unusual given the presence of 2 young children in the home. The investigators found even more disturbing evidence: syringes and IV equipment neatly packed in a medical bag. While Pellet's profession as an anesthesia nurse might explain the possession of these tools, their presence outside a clinical setting sparked important questions for the investigators. Pellet told the officers that Maria had been struggling with severe depression and her mental health had been declining. He said she had taken pills to cope with her emotions, but unfortunately, despite the responders' best efforts, she couldn't be revived and was pronounced dead at 3:58 a.m. After Maria's death, the officers questioned Pellet further in the kitchen. He stated that he and Maria had a conversation earlier that day, became intimate, and then he took a shower. When he came out, he found Maria asleep. Pellet went downstairs for an unspecified reason, and when he returned, he found Maria unresponsive and not breathing. The officers observed Pellet's strange behavior, including excessive sweating and his inability to answer simple questions about the incident. The officer noticed that Pellet was sweating excessively, more so than anyone else, including the first responder who had been trying to revive Maria for 2 hours. This heightened suspicion and led to him being taken to the police station for further questioning by Sergeant Liz Mata. At the station, Pellet was left alone in an interrogation room, which was being recorded by video cameras. When officers reviewed the footage, they were astonished to see Pellet's sudden outburst. He began screaming, crying, hitting the walls, and throwing furniture around the room. The commotion was so intense that people in the nearby hallways and rooms were frightened by the loud noises coming from the room. As a result, Sergeant Luis Matt entered the room at 4 a.m. to speak with Pellet. During their conversation, Pellet opened up again about the events surrounding Maria's death. In a shocking revelation, Pellet also confessed to having an affair with a woman named Janet. He revealed that he had left the family home 5 months prior and was living with Janet at the time of Maria's death. He shared that he had been involved with Janet for 2 years, and Maria had been aware of the affair beforehand. On the night Maria died, her husband visited their family home to talk to her about their marriage. After their conversation, they were intimate. He thought she had fallen asleep in her room, but when he checked on her 10 minutes later, he found her unresponsive. The husband confessed to the officer that he had given Maria clonazepam, a medication prescribed to him to help with her anxiety and depression. However, he couldn't provide details about how many pills she had taken or how many were left in the bottle. Despite being questioned, the husband was unable to provide any additional information to help clarify what had happened. He was released, and an autopsy was performed on Maria just 8 hours after her death. The timing of the autopsy meant that any cause of death should still be detectable in her stomach contents. However, the autopsy results revealed a surprise. No traces of pills were found in Maria's stomach. Instead, the medical examiner discovered a small red pinprick mark on the inside of her elbow, which suggested that she may have been injected with something. The discovery of the mysterious mark on Maria's hand led investigators to explore its potential connection to her death. During their investigation, they found a journal in Maria's home, which she had kept to cope with her anxiety and depression. The journal proved to be a crucial piece of evidence, revealing Maria's innermost thoughts and experiences. Investigators learned that Maria loved her husband dearly and wanted to preserve their family, despite his desire to be with someone else. She expressed her desperation to escape her emotional pain, writing, "I want it to stop. My past haunts me, and I don't want to be sad anymore." Through her journal entries, Maria documented the heartbreak she felt when her husband left their home in Laredo, leaving her to care for their 2 young sons alone. The journal, along with recordings on her cell phone, exposed her husband's abusive behavior and chronicled her emotional journey from grief to healing and eventually, a newfound optimism for the future. Maria Munoz wrote in her journal the day before her death, "What is it that I want? Number 1, move forward." Her journal entries revealed a strong desire to live and move forward with her life, with no mention of suicide or plans to end her life. This led investigators to rule out suicide as a possible cause of death, and they continued to search for answers. Dr. John Hunsinger, Maria's previous employer and an anesthesiologist, became aware of the autopsy findings and contacted the lead detective Cruz. Dr. Hunsinger recommended a comprehensive toxicology screening, which the investigators conducted. In January 2021, the toxicology test results were finally received by investigators Sergeant Luis Matt and Cruz. Contrary to Maria's boyfriend Pellet's claim, Maria did not have clonazepam in her system. The report revealed a surprising discovery: the presence of 7 surgical drugs including morphine, Demerol, Versed, propofol, ketamine, Lian, and Narin. These medications are typically used during surgical procedures, with propofol and ketamine often administered intravenously as sedatives and for pain management. The investigation into Maria's death took a significant turn when toxicology results revealed high levels of propofol in her system. This was shocking because propofol is a highly controlled substance, typically only accessible to medical professionals working in anesthesiology. As a nurse anesthetist, Pellet would have had access to propofol, leading investigators to suspect him. Dr. Hunsinger, who worked with Pellet and had experience with propofol, was stunned by the extreme amount found in Maria's body, the highest he had ever seen. Given Pellet's profession, investigators believed he would know the exact dosage required to sedate or overdose someone. Furthermore, a small mark on Maria's arm suggested she may have been injected with a substance. With the toxicology report, Pellet's suspicious behavior, and Maria's journal, authorities felt they had sufficient evidence to arrest Pellet for Maria's murder. They quickly obtained an arrest warrant, and De La Cruz went to apprehend Pellet, who surprisingly did not resist. He was taken into custody, marking a new phase in the investigation. As police prepared to question him about Maria's death, Pellet would finally face the consequences of his actions. The trial began on March 21, 2023. During the legal proceedings, both the prosecution and defense presented their arguments. The prosecution team, an all-female group referred to as Maria's team, used Maria Munoz's personal journal entries to build a strong case against the defendant Pellet. This evidence helped to portray Maria as a devoted wife and mother to the jury. Prosecutors portrayed Maria as a loving, intelligent, and vibrant individual, evident through her personal journal. They alleged that her husband, Pellet, drugged her by slipping substances into her drink, causing her to become unconscious. While she was incapacitated, they claimed he injected propofol into her arm. The prosecutors also suspected that Pellet deliberately delayed calling 911, ensuring that emergency responders would be unable to revive Maria upon arrival. The prosecutors believed Maria's journals provided insight into the challenges she faced, fueling their determination to seek justice for her. During the final arguments, Pellet's lawyer, Roberto Bali, claimed his client wanted to reconcile with Maria before her death. Bali pointed to the medical examiner's report, which stated that Maria's cause of death remained uncertain, and argued that there was insufficient evidence to prove Pellet's responsibility in her death. Bali highlighted a crucial detail. Pellet had given Maria a drug called Narin, commonly used to reverse overdoses, on the night she died. Bali also revealed that both Pellet and Munoz struggled with drug addiction. Furthermore, he argued that Maria had willingly taken the drugs without being forced, as there were no signs of force on her body. However, an investigation into Maria's social circles, friends, and family revealed that she was not a drug addict. In fact, Pellet was the only person who could have supplied her with the large amount of propofol found in her system. The authorities managed to convince Pellet's girlfriend, surgical nurse Janet Arredondo, to testify against him. she disclosed that Pellet had admitted to giving Maria something to calm her down and confirmed that he had brought drugs, including propofol, home from work. The jury delivered a verdict in under an hour, finding Pellet guilty of murdering his wife, Maria, after a 9-day trial on March 30th, 2023. On April 27th, 2023, Pellet received a life sentence for the murder conviction, plus an additional 10 years and a $10,000 fine for tampering with evidence. As of now, Joel Pellet is serving his life sentence at a Texas Department of Criminal Justice, facing the consequences of his heinous actions. His imprisonment serves as a testament to accountability and a tribute to Maria's life, ensuring that her memory is honored through the pursuit of truth and justice. The reason behind Joel Pellet's brutal act of killing his wife, Maria Munoz, is not entirely clear. However, according to the prosecution, it is believed that he was driven by a desire to end his marriage and start a new life with his girlfriend, Janet Arredondo. Regardless of the motive, Pellet's actions were inexcusable and justice had to be served. The jury's verdict has brought a sense of closure to this tragic case, confirming that heinous crimes like this will not be tolerated. The conviction serves as a powerful reminder that those who commit such atrocities will face the full weight of the law. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Marie Robards. Stephen Robards and Beth Burrows grew up in Fort Worth, Texas. Stephen, whose father owned a small insurance agency, was a well-known figure at school. Beth, a talented athlete in track and field, volleyball, and basketball. Stephen and Beth fell in love in high school and married in 1972. When Beth turned 18, shortly after her boyfriend signed a 4-year contract to serve in the Navy on July 10th, they welcomed daughter, Marie, that same year. Because of Stephen's military service, the family moved frequently between different naval bases. This lifestyle was challenging for Beth. After Stephen completed his service, they returned to Fort Worth. Beth often criticized her husband and described their relationship as a teenage romance, but over time, the love faded and the daily challenges made things worse. Additionally, Stephen's temper and jealousy added to the strain on their relationship, causing Beth to file for divorce in 1979. Marie Robards, their daughter, was a well-behaved student who excelled in her studies. She played the clarinet in the school orchestra and took art and dance lessons during after-school activities. Because her father was in the military, they moved frequently, which made it challenging for Marie to constantly change schools and friends at first. However, she gradually adjusted and became more open and sociable with her new classmates and teachers. After her parents divorced, Marie and her mother, Beth, relocated to a nearby city, while her father stayed in their previous home. Stephen lived in a small one-bedroom apartment in Fort Worth, and Marie, along with Beth, visited him no more than twice a month. In the 1980s, Beth began a relationship with Frank Rouse, a former Navy officer she met while her husband was stationed in Florida. At first, they were just chatting, but after Beth's divorce, they developed a relationship and decided to live together. After leaving the Navy, Frank became a police officer in a small Texas town about an hour outside of Fort Worth, with a population of about 10,000. Frank had also recently gone through a divorce and had full custody of his son, the same age as Beth's daughter, Marie. In 1981, Beth married Frank, but their marriage soon hit a rough patch. Beth had to work, so she spent little time with her husband and children, making it difficult for them to bond. This problem remained unresolved and became more serious when Marie turned 16. One day, she came home to find Frank in bed with another woman. Marie was furious and told her mother immediately, but instead of ending the relationship, Beth remained calm. During this time, Beth worked in the emergency room at a local hospital, which kept her away from home for long hours. As a result, she rarely saw Frank and did not spend much time with her daughter. Beth did not blame Frank for their distance. Instead, she felt responsible because she believed she should have spent more time with him. However, Marie was frustrated and thought that Frank was not good enough for her mother, urging Beth to divorce him. Beth, on the other hand, wanted to handle her own relationships and asked Marie not to interfere. As she grew older, Marie began to distance herself from her family. She often argued with Frank and pointed out his shortcomings. Eventually, Beth had to choose between Marie and Frank. Marie declared that if Beth did not divorce him, she would leave the house. Beth disagreed with her daughter's wishes. Even though Marie started packing, Beth didn't change her mind. She decided that Marie should stay with her maternal relatives in Fort Worth instead of going to her biological father's house. Beth contacted these relatives, who assisted Marie in enrolling in a new school. Marie moved, but after only 5 days in Fort Worth, she had spent all her money and wanted to return home to her mother. At this time, Frank's son chose to live with his biological mother, but soon became unhappy and wanted to return. However, Frank refused to let him return. Now, Marie was faced with a similar situation, and she was not allowed to return home either. The rule that if someone left home, they could not return, created a lot of tension. Beth felt that Frank was forcing her to choose between him and Marie. Many people supported Frank's stance, believing that children should not have a back-and-forth relationship with their parents, as this led to conflict and problems. Frank was steadfast in his beliefs and wanted to prevent such problems. He thought he was promoting discipline and trying to avoid constant chaos and tension. It is important to note that Frank was a former military man, known for his decisiveness and discipline. Marie had to accept the situation. At this point, she had lost respect for Frank because of his affair, but after recent events, she had come to hate Frank. Marie left Fort Worth and moved into a rented apartment. Meanwhile, Beth tried to convince her husband to let them reunite. She believed that this was just a temporary situation and that Marie would return soon. Unfortunately, despite her efforts, Frank was unyielding and never allowed Marie back. Beth felt trapped in this situation. The strain on their relationship led her to seek help from a psychologist. Marie then decided to move back in with her father, Stephen. Marie's decision to return seemed to stem from desperation. Stephen was happy to have his daughter back. At the time, he was living alone and struggling with depression. He later found work as a mailman and became romantically involved with Sandra Hudgens, who lived in the same apartment complex as him. During this time, they lived in a small, cramped one-room apartment. Marie slept on a cot in the kitchen. Steve realized that his daughter was struggling, so he tried to cheer her up. He took her to the movies and outings regularly. However, Sandra felt that these efforts did not make much of a difference. Marie's academic performance declined, and she frequently called Beth, asking to come home. She missed her mother's love and attention. Marie was unhappy with her father's cooking and cleaning and sometimes cried on the phone, begging to come home. She expressed her dislike of the new school and complained about her father's small living space. Marie is confused as to why her mother favors Frank over her and feels that her mother will not stand up to him. Beth, her mother, explained that she felt helpless because her husband would not let her visit Marie. Marie eventually began to write in her diary about her thoughts of ending her life. When her father found out about this, he was very worried and immediately informed Beth. It turns out Marie exaggerated her emotions to get attention. As the months passed, things stabilized. Marie seemed to be adjusting. Her grades improved significantly. She was able to connect with her classmates and everything seemed to be back to normal. Marie's emotions stabilized as well. She had completely adapted to her new environment. According to Sandra, Marie never had any conflicts with her father, was respectful to him and remained calm. Stephen did his best to support her. However, behind Marie's calm exterior, there was something darker. After 3 years, Marie moved back in with her father. On February 18th, Stephen ordered Mexican food for dinner. After the meal, he planned to attend a church service. About an hour later, Stephen returned to his apartment complex, complaining of severe stomach pain and feeling very unwell. Maria, along with Sandra, went to check on him after hearing that he was unwell. When they arrived, Stephen was in pain, shaking, foaming at the mouth, and having difficulty breathing. The ambulance arrived shortly after, but it was too late. They tried to insert a breathing tube, but his airway had closed. Stephen was rushed to the hospital, but he died on the way. Maria was in shock, staring at her father and trying to hide her emotions from Sandra. She had no idea what had really happened, because Stephen's death was not an accident. Hours after the incident, Frank and Beth learned that Stephen was dead. They had to take Marie home, something she had wanted for a long time. After an autopsy, the medical examiner concluded that Stephen had died of a heart attack, identifying symptoms such as chest pain, nausea, and difficulty breathing. The case seemed straightforward and that Stephen's death was due to a heart attack. He did not perform toxicology tests. Even if they wanted to run those tests, the lab didn't have the equipment needed to detect the poison in Stephen's blood. After the burial, Maria stayed by her father's grave, remaining in shock even after everyone else had left. Following the funeral, her mother Beth approached her, visibly upset, and shared her plans to break up with Frank and move to Panama City, Florida, with Maria. However, Maria began to have difficulty breathing and panic, and it took her a long time to calm down. Beth believed that Maria's grief was due to the death of her father Stephen, unaware of the deeper issues at play. Marie and Beth then moved to Panama City. Beth found a job as a clerk at the Department of Motor Vehicles and enrolled her daughter in school. Things seemed to improve, but Marie continued to struggle with depression. Her mother suspected that this was related to her father's death. Beth blamed herself for what had happened. As a high school senior, Marie saw a psychologist who diagnosed her with major depression. Marie's mother recalled the serious problems Stephen had faced and was concerned that his mental health problems might be affecting Marie. To help Marie cope with her depression, she sought the help of a psychiatrist. Things changed when Frank came to Panama City hoping to reconcile with Beth, believing that he needed to devote more time to their marriage and change his attitude towards raising their children. Surprisingly, Beth forgave her unfaithful husband once again. Marie was surprised by her mother's decision. She expressed her unwillingness to live with Frank, who had been unfaithful to Beth, and said that she missed Texas and wanted to live with her mother without any men. However, Beth decided to move in with Frank. In response, Marie contacted her grandfather, Jim, and asked if she could live with him in Mansfield. The family agreed, and Marie moved in with her grandfather. Marie became an outstanding granddaughter, an excellent student, and very polite. She was deeply engaged in the lives of her family and friends. Marie continued to pursue her passion for art and showed interest in journalism. She was intelligent and attractive, yet she dressed simply and never acted impulsively. She always returned home on time, didn't drink at parties, and avoided dating, even though many boys showed interest in her. Eventually, Marie formed a friendship with one of the most popular girls at school, Stacy. Stacy believed that Marie had gone through something traumatic, though she could not fathom how severe it truly was. In January 1994, Marie and Stacy spent the night together, studying Shakespeare's Hamlet. As Stacy read the part about poisoning, Marie suddenly looked pale and unwell. Concerned, Stacy asked her what was wrong. At first, she thought Marie might be upset about the possibility of pregnancy, but Marie denied it. Stacy then asked Marie if she had crashed her grandfather's car, but she shook her head in response. Stacy joked, "You didn't kill anyone, did you?" Marie became quiet and then asked an unusual question. She wanted to know how her friend felt about such events happening in real life. Stacy paused to think. Marie attempted to stand up from the couch but quickly collapsed back in tears, confessing that she had poisoned her father. Overwhelmed by her emotions, she could no longer contain her guilt. The Marie then recounted the story of the murder. She explained that in early February 1993, during a chemistry class, she had poured a substance from a bottle into a napkin, which she later put in her backpack. That evening, she added a bit of poison to her father's meal, and subsequently she endured a long struggle with guilt over her actions. After Marie confessed, she pleaded with Stacy to keep it a secret. Marie had only shared this information with Stacy. She revealed that she had access to a deadly poison that is nearly impossible to detect. This poison can quickly cause a heart attack, leading to death that appears natural. However, Marie claimed she was unaware of its lethal potential at the time. She only wanted her father to become ill so that her mother would care for her. Stacy eventually told her mother everything, and they were both shocked. The mother contacted the Poison Control Center to inquire if the substance could be fatal. The lab technicians sensed something was off and declined to provide an answer. The mother then hung up the phone. Marie felt lost and unsure of what to do. At first, she kept it a secret. She struggled with her feelings for a long time but eventually convinced herself that it was just a cruel prank. Stacy suggested that Marie talk to a psychologist or a priest to share her feelings. However, things did not improve. In February 1994, on the first anniversary of Stephen's death, Jim took Marie and her friend Stacy out to dinner. As Jim raised a glass in remembrance, both girls burst into tears. For several weeks, Stacy was tormented by feelings of guilt and nightmares until she finally decided to reach out to the school counselor and confided in her friend. Although it sounded strange, her friend took the matter seriously and contacted the police, hoping to find answers. The police lab did not have the necessary equipment to investigate the results, making everything futile. Stacy also began to distance herself from Marie. She wanted to avoid all contact with Marie. Their friendship eventually fell apart. Meanwhile, Marie believed that everything had been forgotten, unaware that there was an investigation going on. In October 1994, a Fort Worth police officer contacted Stacy, saying that the toxicology results were back. They revealed that Stephen Robards had indeed been poisoned. He had received a dose 250 times higher than the fatal dose, suggesting that it was premeditated murder. Marie was arrested while studying at the University of Texas at Austin, where many people considered her sweet and harmless. She confessed immediately. Marie said that she never intended to kill her father. She just wanted to make him sick so she could reunite with her mother. Unfortunately, she miscalculated the dose and accidentally caused Stephen's death. Many people found it hard to believe that Marie could have done such an act, and some even blamed her mother for the situation. They believed that her mother's abandonment had caused Marie distress. They felt that Marie was not supposed to be with her mother, which caused her to take drastic actions to get her attention. Marie first appeared in court for a preliminary hearing on October 28, 1994, but she was released on bail and placed in the custody of her mother. A major issue now is whether Marie should be treated as a minor or an adult. Since she was 17 at the time of poisoning her father and is legally considered a minor. On March 30, 1995, Marie Robards was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. It was decided that she would be tried as an adult. Her mother posted $10,000 bail, allowing Marie to move back in with Frank and Beth while she awaited her trial. She was 19 at the time. Marie's mother used the money Marie received from Stephen's life insurance policy totaling $60,000, to hire 2 experienced attorneys from Fort Worth. Their defense strategy was based on the argument that Marie wanted her father sick, but did not intend to kill him. Her goal was simply to get back to her mother. The prosecutor's office argued that the actions were motivated by malicious intent, particularly due to the insurance money that Marie received. In this case, the prosecution suggested pressing charges for first-degree murder. Testifying for the prosecution was Marie's best friend, Stacy, who provided details about the emotional state of the Marie. The defense called a psychiatrist to testify, who stated that Marie was not a cold-blooded killer and was merely suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder due to guilt over killing her father. Throughout the hearing, Marie sat silently, often covering her face and crying. Although Marie expressed remorse and expressed her love for her father, the prosecutor claimed that her feelings were not genuine. The prosecution argued that the poisoning showed premeditated murder, arguing that a stomachache alone did not justify returning to her mother. Instead, it implied a desire to kill. At the time, a friend of Marie's mentioned that Marie was considering various ways to reunite with her mother. Marie thought that if she burned down her father's apartment, her mother would come get her. However, no one took Marie seriously. Everyone believed that she was joking. Beth felt guilty about the situation. During the trial, she expressed that if she had left Frank sooner and moved to Florida with Marie, this tragedy could have been avoided. Marie's grandfather, Jim, pleaded for mercy for his granddaughter, asserting that she could not have killed the man she loved. The prosecutor asked for a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 35 years. It is possible that the pleas of family members for a lighter sentence, combined with Marie's emotional expression, influenced the decision. Marie Robards was ultimately sentenced to 28 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 7 years. After the verdict, the lawyers immediately appealed, arguing that the prosecution had presented insufficient evidence about Marie's mental state. However, in 1998, the appeal was denied and she was sent to prison. In a conversation with her mother, Marie expressed that she did not want Stacy to feel guilty about the events that had occurred. Marie believed that Stacy's actions were justified. Marie ultimately served 8 years in prison before being released in 2003. She had since married and changed her name.